I live in a city with a public transportation system. They've been extremely short-staffed, and more often than not, you have to call to make sure your bus is even coming. On weekdays during business hours, the public transit operator will order a lift for you to get to work if your bus isn't showing up, or if they happen to be short a driver. So Tuesday, I'm at the bus stop after checking multiple times to see if my bus is coming, only to find out that it was not. They ordered me a lift, and this nice, older gentleman was my driver. We had a very casual conversation before he started to ask me personal questions. I'm a bartender, and I'm super friendly already, so I didn't really think his questions would be ill-intentioned. Told him I'm not married and that I'm pretty much a loner. I basically go to work and go home to spend time with my family, and that's about it. He then leans over and says to me, "I'd marry you in a heartbeat." Again, I'm just thinking he's being funny or perhaps just being nice. I asked him to drop me off at the downtown grocery so I could pick up some things I needed for work. When we finally stopped, he said he was joking and that he's married and had a son my age. Asked if I was interested in maybe meeting him. Since I have a terrible track record, I figured it wouldn't hurt meeting someone out of my circle and comfort zone. So I gave the man my number and we parted ways. The next morning he texts me and asks if I need a ride for work. I told him he didn't have to do that, and I was sure my bus was running today. He said it would be his pleasure though, and he'd pick me up at my house at around 3 p.m. An hour later, he asked if I wanted to have lunch with him before work. I told him I was busy and that I couldn't do that. He said, "Okay, see you at 3. He showed up and let me know he was outside. While I was finishing getting my things together, I opened the door and he starts to walk up my stairs to my house. I told him I was ready and we could head downtown. When I get in the back seat, he turns around and tells me that actually he has a confession to make. He told me from the time I took off my mask, his heart danced like a butterfly. He said that he hadn't been able to stop thinking about me since the day before and that he'd love to spend time with me. He'd even pay me to spend a day with him. And that's when I started to feel super uncomfortable. The whole ride was making me cringe, but I know when you're in a situation like that with a predator, playing nice is a whole lot safer than freaking out. He continued on the entire ride about how he loved me at first sight and wanted to make me his Lebanese queen. As we got closer to downtown, I started to feel some relief. He dropped me off at my hotel and said, "See you tomorrow." That evening at work, I checked my phone after a busy happy hour. He had texted me a couple of times. He sent a picture of the hotel and said he'd wait for me to give me a ride home. I told him I already had a ride. Thursday morning, I'm out running some errands with my mom and sister. He texts me and asks how early he can pick me up because he just can't stop thinking about me. I asked him to please stop and told him that I was with family. He continued to text me all day and evening, begging to see me, telling me his heart is aching to see his Lebanese queen. I just kept telling him to please stop. Friday morning is when shit completely hit the fan. He tells me he loves me no matter what. He said, "I told my wife about you, and that I'm in love with you. I told her I want a divorce." I told him, please don't do that. It wasn't right to treat his wife that way. Then he said, "I'm picking you up at 5:30, and I'm not taking no for an answer." I ignored the messages during the day and just went about my off day. About 5:25, my video doorbell rings, and there he is standing on my porch for at least 15 minutes. I told him I wasn't home and that he should leave. He continued to text me though and begged to come pick me up from my parents. I eventually called the non-emergency police station, but he had already left by the time I got through. I filed a general report, but technically they can't do anything unless he's standing on my porch directly threatening me. They advised me to report it through Lyft though, so I did. I haven't heard anything since, but that shit was creepy as fuck. Okay, so I'm not conventionally pretty or classically pretty. I'm the Duffy in any friend group I'm in. I never worry about being hit on, disrespected, or kidnapped. I never had to worry about my own safety when going out either, as I was never the one anyone wanted to get to know or be around. I'm just so plain, and it's always me that has to be on the lookout for my friends, male and female alike. Now, I like to go to a local bar almost daily. I don't drink alcohol there. I just get a normal Coke and wait for my ride home. It's my usual hangout spot after work, so I like to just sit and chill and mind my own business. Well, a few weeks ago, I had just gotten off work and was chilling at my usual spot and sipping on my drink while working on a new pendant I was making. I started wire wrapping crystals into jewelry. I didn't think anyone would try and talk to me, since I knew I basically blended right into the walls, even though the staff know me, and pay me slight attention and are nice to me. Suddenly though, this weird guy I'd never seen before came over and sat at my table right across from me. I was very surprised and looked up at him, struck up a small conversation that I can't even remember how it started, but he started to ask me a few questions about myself that I thought were totally normal. It all flowed together, so I didn't think too much of it. Again, I'm very plain and didn't think anyone would want to do anything to me. I drank 3 glasses of soda by then and had to use the restroom, so I grabbed my phone and purse and went to the bathroom. I may not have been worried about being abducted, but that didn't mean I didn't need to worry about my identity, cash, and contacts though. I went back a few minutes later and went back to working, since none of my stuff had been touched. I called a waitress over and asked her for a new drink. She nodded, as it had always been ingrained in me that you never leave your drink unattended. If you do, just have it remade, or leave it to the bartender. As she was going to grab for my old drink, which I had only taken a few sips out of, the guy got immediately irate at me, saying I was being wasteful for just ordering a new drink. I looked at him with a raised eyebrow in confusion. I asked him why it was any of his business if I did or not. It was my money after all, and the refills were free. He then said I was making more work for the waitress for no reason. This really annoyed me, and I told him again it was my business, and if he didn't like that he could always leave. He then tried to wave the waitress off with letting her change my drink, but I'd had enough of his nonsense. Fine then, you drink it if you think it's such a waste. This seemed to have caught him off guard. He looked shocked and then got angry, before standing up and stomping away. I looked at the drink and handed it to the waitress. I told her that something didn't feel right about that guy that I was just talking to. If she could tell the bartender to keep an eye on him and dump out my drink and bring me water from then on, that would be just great. I left for home after being picked up shortly after and found out the next day after work that he had been arrested for assault. I didn't find out till today exactly what happened. Apparently he had gotten into a fight with the bartender working that night. The bartender had caught him putting something into a girl's drink when she wasn't looking, and he stopped her from drinking it. The guy got mad and immediately escalated into a whole fight. The cops were called and now he's awaiting trial. Apparently he was trying to see if he could get someone like me, who always had her guard down for herself because her confidence was low. He thought I'd be an easy mark with just a little attention. But when I didn't just drink my drink when I came back, he figured he had to try on another girl. If he really was targeting me, I have to question his sanity and sobriety. Thank goodness for those old lessons about safety growing up. When I was much younger, I used to go out and party almost every single night. I couldn't stand staying at home, so being out on the town felt really good, especially with friends. We would go bar hopping, and one of the pubs that we frequented was called Poppin'. We would get wasted, as the alcohol here is dirt cheap, due to the island being duty-free. Imagine being teenagers and being wasted most of the time. Not exactly a good combination, and bad things are bound to happen. I grew up on this island, and I know many of the townsfolk here. It's a relatively safe place to be, since it is just a small island. You could literally leave your car doors unlocked and no one would steal your car. Hence, there's also nowhere to run, and the only way out of the island is either by flight, speedboat, or ro-ro ferry. So, back to the story. I was out one night with my buddies as usual, having some drinks at a local pub. We were having a great time listening to the live band that was playing there. It was crowded inside, and people were drinking and dancing. Me and my friends were too. My friend's name is Steve. See, Steve and I were close, and I knew him since he was in high school. At the time, I was in my early 20s. We were really good friends. While we were in the pub, suddenly he called me to go outside and accompany him to go and see someone. Curiously, I followed him outside. When I asked him what was going on, he just told me to back him up, and that the guy we were gonna meet was apparently dating Steve's younger sister. Steve didn't like that one bit, since his sister was still in high school. So, when the guy came, Steve warned him not to disturb his sister again and to stay away from her, which I thought was a fair stipulation. Me being the hero wannabe, I butted in and started telling him the same thing. He wasn't taking it one bit from me though, and got really pissed instead. He said that I was going to regret opening my mouth, and just walked off. We went back inside and I started calling up friends, telling them that a fight was going to go down, as I knew that guy was going to call his buds as well. About 15 minutes passed by. I got called out. This guy had brought about 15 to 20 guys, and they surrounded me and Steve. The guy's uncle pulled me aside and slapped me, saying that I was a dead man. I tried to fight back, but then he did something that really shook me up. He brandished an army knife from his back jeans. The kind that has those teeth-like textures at the back end of the blade. The kind that could literally be used to pull your guts inside out. Yeah, it was that kind of knife. I froze and didn't know what to do, as he was holding onto my t-shirt with one hand and had a knife in the other. I immediately thought to myself, oh shit, I'm gonna get stabbed and killed tonight. So much was racing through my mind, I couldn't think. According to Steve, almost all of these guys had weapons on them. One of them that didn't even broke a beer bottle and was holding up sharp broken glass, ready to harm us. Out of nowhere, my brother-in-law came screaming in, saying that he was a cop and that backup was coming if they didn't settle it there and then. My brother-in-law is quite a big guy as well, and stands at almost 6 feet tall, so I knew that they believed he really was a cop. Thankfully, they started to settle down. The guy that was dating Steve's sister still wasn't satisfied though, and wanted to fight me one-on-one. At first I denied him, but after he kept asking, I just agreed. Luckily though, he changed his mind, and just settled with a firm handshake. He told me not to go after his uncle, and really wanted to settle. I agreed since this was such a small island, and you would never know if you would meet the same person twice. I went home after that, as I'd had quite about enough for the night. That incident shook the alcohol right out of me, and sobered me up right away. I still saw that guy and his knife-wielding uncle a couple more times when I was out in town, but we always just nodded to each other, and never had problems with one another since. But that's my story of the time I almost got stabbed and probably killed by some random guy's uncle just for butting into their conversation, which really was none of my business in the first place. And that's also the reason why I no longer favor going out to drink till you can't think straight. It's better to stick to herbs instead, and maybe just chill at home. This may well be the worst way to tell your parents you're gay. Do not recommend. My sophomore year of high school, I was on the cast and costume crew for our fall play. One of my castmates/crewmates was a really cute guy. His name was Mark. He always wore skinny jeans. I learned from a mutual friend that he was bisexual, so I started flirting with him, looking for opportunities to hang out, sending him memes, everything a closeted nerd would do. After 3 months of flirting, hanging out, and gradually growing more affectionate, I asked him out on the last day of our play, and he said yes. The issue? My mother is a very conservative Christian, and although she was tolerant of gay people, I knew she'd never allow me to have a boyfriend while I lived with her. Side note, I had 4. So, we had to hide our relationship, which early on was not too bad. We'd go to the movies or his house and just hang out. But everything started going downhill the first time we had sex. He started getting really demanding about hanging out. And by demanding about hanging out, I mean he was never not horny and extremely frustrated. I was cool with it at first cause, well, sex. But after a while, I was starting to get pissed off about it. Working a relationship around my mom was already difficult enough, and my generally asocial nature was not at all enjoying having to leave the house so often. I tried to talk to Mark about it. He seemed understanding, for like a week. Then he started getting extremely nasty. He'd avoid me at school, only to text and insult me, and act insanely jealous of my friends. Eventually, though, I dumped him in July, after just 9 months, over text as well, while I was away in Florida. Look, I was 16, fuck you. Anyway, he completely lost it. He blew up my phone daily for a week. Then he started acting normal, like we were best friends. That lasted another month. We got back to school, my junior year, his senior. Unfortunately, while we were still dating, we had tried to coordinate our schedules, so now we had 4 out of 7 classes together. For a while at first, he seemed okay. Then, though, he started staring at me. Then the texting started again. Sad messages. I figured he was done being a dick and started being nice to him again. Big ass mistake. He started getting attached again extremely quickly. He would try to integrate himself every time I went out with my friends. He would beg me to take him back. I would say no and explain again and again why we couldn't be together. Around October, he started getting real bad. Like 1 a.m. texts about swallowing a whole bottle of melatonin bad. In hindsight, I should have gone to the authorities, but I was terrified that doing so would lead to my mom finding out. So I tried to handle it myself. Bad idea. He got worse. He threatened to kill himself regularly and tried to turn my friends against me. The worst day thus far came when we were building our homecoming float for drama club. I was hanging out and casually flirt bantering with 2 of my male friends, Isaac and Caleb, who are both straight. Mark saw this, stood up from where he'd been painting, and walked out in a hurry. A few minutes later, a freshman girl walked in, asking me where Mark was going. He said I'd know. I found out later he'd driven himself to the ER to get counseling. I was happy, thinking he'd finally get himself some help, but I had no damn clue how obsessive he was. I came home from rehearsal one day to find his car parked up my street, and Mark walking towards it from my house. My mom was out on the porch waving goodbye to him. She thought we were just friends, and loved him quite a lot. Apparently he'd been in the neighborhood and decided to drop by. For some more background, I'm the eldest of 7 boys. My youngest brothers were 2 years old and 6 months in the womb during this. My mom raised us primarily by herself. Dad's a dirtbag, stepdad was deployed throughout this whole ordeal. She's an honest 6 feet tall, about half that wide, and can easily sling me across her shoulders. I'm 6'3" and 180 pounds. She's also the best shot with a pistol I've ever seen. Not someone Mark would want to tangle with, even while she was heavily pregnant. I told her we did hang out, just not as much lately. She accepted this, and we went about our days. For a week or so, everything was okay. And then I came home from rehearsal one night. Mark's car was parked up the street again, and he was sitting on our porch with my mother, who had my baby brother on her lap. She saw me get out of the car and gave me a come hither crook of the finger. Slowly, I walked up to the porch. It turned out Mark had told her everything. Everything. our whole relationship, but with me as the abuser and himself as the victim. She started to lay into me, then dismissed Mark, who had gone back to his car snickering. After she was done ranting, I calmly told her my side of the story. Fortunately, she believed me, but she was still pissed that I'd lied to her, so I was grounded. This pales in comparison to what happened that night, though. Our house is quite old and crappy. The windows can easily be jiggered open from the outside, even when they're locked. Mark knew this, since I'd used it to my advantage many times when sneaking out. My mom's room, where she and my 2-year-old brother sleep, is right across the hall from mine, facing the backyard. Mine faces the street. That night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I was suddenly cold. I put on my glasses, and immediately I saw why. My window was wide open. I whipped around, searching for whoever did it. My bedroom door was open too. As I got up, I heard the sound of my mom's bedroom door quietly closing. I raced as quietly as possible to the door, and I heard something that stopped my heart. A metal click, like a gun being cocked. I flew across the hall and threw my mom's door open. The lights were on. Mark was crouched in the corner, a cleaver in his hand, and my brother was sound asleep. My mom was calmly sitting up in bed, glasses on, Harry Potter book in her lap, 10mm pistol in her hands, pointed directly at Mark, who was shaking and sobbing. She told him to shut up before he woke up the baby, and directed me to call the cops so she could keep an eye on him. Mark was taken into custody, but my mom declined to press charges, on the condition that Mark move out to Arizona with his dad, instead of staying in Missouri with his mom. He did, and from then on I hardly saw him, unless he was Snapchatting my friends begging to talk to me. You know, standard stalker shit. This is quite long, but hopefully it's not too bad considering this wackiness has been going on for over 10 years. I'll sum it up in one neat sentence near the end. First things first though, gotta rip the band-aid off and admit that from late 2001 to mid-2003, when I was a teenager, I wrote fan fiction and posted it online. Now, my stories weren't that great, but I did make some friends because I posted them. So I don't regret doing it. Even after I stopped posting my stories, I was still active online. Instead, I started posting fan art and dumb stuff about the role plays I did with my buddies over on DeviantArt. Yeah, cringe. Maybe I sound like a lame fangirl, but whatever. I was having a lot of fun. Fast forward to 2008 when I got a PM on DeviantArt that was, well, I wasn't expecting online life to take such a strange turn on this particular random day. But the writer Eerie began her missive by informing me, a complete stranger, that she was seriously mentally ill. She listed a wide variety of disorders, including schizophrenia, which had tormented her all her life. She then said she was scared to write me like this, but she had to do so she could move on. Move on from what, you might ask? From her hatred of me, of course. Eerie wrote that she had hated me for a long time, based on the fanfiction I wrote, because my stories terrified her. Okay, now let's be clear here. I wrote stories about characters from cartoons and one comic book. One of the characters from the comic was a violent and terrible person, and so I wrote about him doing violent and terrible things. But that's not what scared her. No. Eerie was scared because she was in love with said violent character, John, and believed they were destined for each other. She even said that he talked to her in her head. Then she read my fanfiction and suddenly John stopped talking to her. She knew it was because he was talking to me instead. She was absolutely certain I had stolen her true love from her. She said that after that she developed a belief that I was the arbiter of her reality, more generally, and that I was capable of reaching into her mind and not only reading but stealing away her thoughts. This caused her so much anguish and suffering. However, she went on. Deep down, I think she knew this was a delusion caused by her mental illness. She closed her PM by begging me to respond to her, to confirm that I was just a normal girl, so she could get past the mental trauma I had caused her and be happy again. Now, I again have to rip the band-aid off, inviting judgment here, by admitting that sometimes I am a complete dumbass. I'm also a soft-hearted person, and the idea that someone could have been harmed by these silly stories I'd posted years earlier, well, that made me kinda sad. So I did a soft-hearted but ultimately dumbass thing, and responded. Yes, I was a normal teenage girl when I posted that stuff, and now I'm a normal early 20s woman. No mind-stealing superpowers. Also, I kinda don't know you and had no idea you even existed until you sent me this, so how could I have singled you out to hurt you with my fanfics? Please don't worry about me. I thought, what a kind person I am. Surely that will be the end of it. Well, wrong. Ari replied to me using a different, upbeat, and cheerful tone, saying she was so glad I wrote her back because now she knew she didn't have to fear me, and instead we could just be friends. She told me she loved my fanfics honestly, and by the way, what was my real name, so she could search me up on Facebook. Excuse me? No. A dumbass I may be, but I am not that stupid. I told her I didn't have a Facebook, which was a lie, and was busy with school. So I wouldn't be on DeviantArt a whole lot. I wished her good luck with her mental health recovery and hoped she would have a good life. A truth, I mean, so far as she just seemed troubled and weird, but I wouldn't have wished harm on her. I didn't get a response to that, but a few months later, I got a DeviantArt PM from another account I did not recognize. It simply said, "Hey, Fox Got Socks, how do you get your characters to talk for you?" Now, I hadn't posted any fanfiction for years, but I was still participating in fandom and talked online about writing. I honestly thought this question was about writing, specifically how to write dialogue. I mulled over in my head how to respond and ended up not answering right away. I went back to my PMs a few days later and saw another new message. This one saying, with a lot of exclamation points and cry-typing style misspellings, that I had to answer and teach this stranger how to talk to my characters. That I had no idea how long this user had suffered because of me. Oh my goodness, I wonder who this was using another account. And guess what? I was still a goddamn dumbass. So I answered the first message, but sort of detachedly, ignoring the desperation of the second message, and just kind of giving general tips for how to learn a character's voice, and how to write good dialogue for them. Once again, I got a very chipper reply, including a confession that yeah, it was Ari. She just loved talking to me, and thought I was so nice and such a good friend to be patient with her. You see, she told me she had realized she was not in love with just John, but specifically my John, from my stupid fanfiction, and now she could talk to him anytime because we were friends. Somehow I got the idea, though, that she was not asking to roleplay. Instead, she thought she would be able to communicate directly with this once-removed fictional character now. I feigned ignorance, though, and said something like, our RP group is kinda private and not accepting any new members, but I hope I answered your question. Please have a good day. See, I did not really want to be friends with someone who, A, seemed to believe I was somehow responsible for her mental illness despite not even knowing her and having only spoken to her twice, and B, had already told me she hated me and thought I could control all of reality. On the kinder side of things, I honestly didn't think continuing to converse would be good for either of us, to be honest. On the meaner side, I just really didn't want to interact with this person anymore. I felt like I had already done more than enough to help this complete stranger, let me remind you. Okay, so she stopped responding to me. I thought this strange interlude in my life would be over. Wrong. Now fast forward 7 entire years to early July 2015, at which time I had moved my main online presence to Tumblr. I'd left a note on my DeviantArt account in 2011 when I moved, giving my new Tumblr screen name so my fandom buddies could find me more easily. At this point, let me say, I had not posted any fanfiction in over a decade. I was also not talking much at all online about John, except to reblog the occasional post someone else made about the comic he was from, as you sometimes do on Tumblr. Suddenly, gasp, I received an anonymous ask, and that ask said in no uncertain terms that I was the cause of the asker's suffering, and I had callously disregarded others' feelings. It closed with some kind of weird threat. I can't remember exactly what it was now because I was instinctively so startled that I deleted it due to being unnerved. I guess that it could be Eerie based on the typing style, and the fact that there couldn't be two people in the world who thought I was making them suffer, right? But then again, it had been 7 years, so I wasn't entirely sure. I did yet another dumbass thing. I made a post that said something along the lines of, "To the anon who just sent me a vaguely threatening ask, sorry if anything I posted has upset you. Please let me know if I can tag my post in a way so you can block whatever content you find distressing." A couple of days later, I got another anon ask calling me a prattling, ostentatious idiot and saying it doesn't work that way. Strong emotions cannot just be blocked. The message then went on. "You stole him away from me, and I've been living in that turmoil ever since, but you don't care." Ah, yes, definitely Eerie. There was no question about it. After all, I hadn't stolen anyone else's fictional boyfriend that I know of. I turned off anonymous ass, went back to my old untouched DeviantArt account, where I found a comment on my front page from yet another third account that said, "If you still talk to him, tell him that I love him and that I always will. He was the first man I ever loved, and it was your version of him I loved above all. I've been jealous, angry at you, angry at myself, depressed and psychotic. I tore myself to shreds over him, and my heart aches and cries. The first cut is the deepest. I love you, John." The date on this message was June 28, 2015, just a few days before the first anon ask on Tumblr. I did a little bit of internet sleuthing, then found her Fur Affinity account, where she had posted screeds in her journal about hating anyone else who wrote or drew anything related to that character. Okay. I had also discovered through this Google search that I was apparently not completely special in triggering Eerie's ire. She had also gone after other people on Tumblr in much the same way. This other person had amassed a collection of screenshots of her behavior, and it was super not good. Anyway, I figured since I'd blocked anon asks, maybe now she'd finally go away. Of course, wrong. Eerie's next wave of attacks began in 2016, when someone started suddenly reblogging my personal text posts with cryptic comments like, "You have a beautiful soul." The username was nothing like Eerie or any of the other account names she'd used before, so I thought it was just someone being socially awkward. But after a few months of this, I received a message from this account, through Tumblr's chat function, that let the cat out of the bag. Said something like, "I'm a British female creature and I'm so scared of dying alone and friendless. I used to read your fan fiction and it always made me feel better. I think you're an amazing woman and would like to get to know you better. Please, I'm begging you, don't leave me alone in the dark." Well, that sure sounded a whole lot like Eerie to me. This was confirmed when I went to the person's Tumblr and saw they had recently posted something passive-aggressive about another user she was known to stalk. If that wasn't enough, they also had a lot of weird innuendo-laden posts about John and a couple of other characters, including Sherlock and a man I didn't recognize who they claimed to have legally married. At that point, I realized enough was enough. I blocked all the accounts that sent me the messages right away without responding. Over the next several months, Eerie attempted to contact others on Tumblr, who it was obvious I talked to a lot. My girlfriend, our best friend, she'd send them chat messages like the one paraphrased above, begging for their friendship, and also, just casually asking what I was doing, whether they could get me to talk to her, that sort of thing. I know my girlfriend and BFF blocked her too after they asked me who the hell this person was, and I told them the whole story. I also discovered that apparently on Tumblr, you can choose the option to allow chat messages only from people you follow. With that account blocked and no one I don't follow able to ever send me chat messages again, I thought that surely this weird nonsense would now end. See, the thing about Tumblr, if you're not familiar with the website, is that if you block someone, they just can't interact with your posts or follow you. A block causes someone to auto-unfollow you, and they won't see your posts on their dash. They also won't be able to send you asks. However, they can still go to your actual blog and see everything you post. If they try to interact with it, they won't be able to, which will, of course, tip them off that you've blocked them. In the beginning of 2018, she engaged in a complete whirlwind of activity. She made new accounts desperately asking her to talk to her. Please talk to me, I'm so harmless, you don't know how hard it is to be me. I'm so scared of the darkness. Humans are social animals and I am dying without you. I want to kidnap you far away in a happy ending, my darling. I blocked those accounts immediately, so she made a new one and reblogged some post I'd made a while back about that comic book with a comment like, "My first love, the first cut is the deepest," sending me multiple messages saying, "You stole him from me." I blocked that account immediately too, so she made another one, made some meme generators, sparkly pictures of rats and spiders with texts like, "I want to sit next to you and be your friend. I promise I'm not scary." She would post them all with @ to my username, so this mention would show up in my activity feed. So I blocked that account. Then she made another one, posted a quote from my favorite author, and sent me a couple of asks saying that this author would disagree with how I was treating her by continuing to block and shun her friendship when she was harmless and just thought I was an amazing person. I blocked that one too. Mate, did you forget you called me a prattling, ostentatious idiot and threatened me? Because I sure didn't. That went on for several accounts. One of which even had the blog title in huge letters at the top of, "Hello, my nickname reserved only for close friends." One of which she inundated with photos of herself glaring at the camera, adding me in each one. She only ever used one of these accounts to actually post, reblog, and like things from other people, seemingly like a normal user. All of the rest only existed to harass me. I started trying to report everything about her after the third or fourth time making multiple accounts solely to evade my blocks. But if you know anything about Tumblr, you can guess that they did not respond with more than an automated, "Okay, I guess we'll look into this. In the meantime, have you tried blocking them?" Anyway, throughout 2018, I just had to deal with the fact that anytime I saw the little red flag, it would probably be something creepy and threatening or passive-aggressive from Eerie that would put me on the edge for a few hours and remind me that no matter what I did, she would somehow read everything I post. I haven't gotten anything from her so far in 2019, but I figure as long as she's out there, there's always a chance she will come back. Maybe not right away, maybe not until another 10 years from now. But let me just say this. Eerie, you fucking weirdo. I'm genuinely sorry about your mental illnesses and hope you get help for them, but while they may explain some of your behavior, it certainly can't excuse it. I'm not and never will be your friend, because you are not harmless. You've made me heavily curtail my social interaction on everything by cutting off many methods of communication that could have been used to make new friends. You've made me worried about talking about the things I enjoy. You made it so anytime I see I have notifications, my heart rate goes up, because it might be more of your disturbing bullshit. You've harassed my loved ones, you've harassed strangers that didn't do anything to deserve it. I don't control your reality, but if I did, you can bet I'd use that power to ensure we'd never meet. I had been sent to Korea from my university a few years ago. They told me for my major I had to go somewhere in Asia, and my friend had really talked up Korea for me. I knew nothing about it whatsoever, but I decided, what the hell, and I embarked on a semester-long trip. I had only had one serious boyfriend in my life who I had just broken up with a few months prior. I also don't enjoy one-night stands, and wasn't digging the dudes at the clubs in Seoul. But I still wanted to have some sort of romantic experience, I suppose. My friend recommended I use this dating app to meet English-speaking Koreans. That way I could meet someone and experience the actual dating culture. I thought, I'm young, so why not? I was just so eager to have these new experiences. Maybe it sounds dumb to try dating in a foreign country you know barely anything about, but it worked out for me eventually. Just not on the first date. I met him on a dating app after being in Seoul for about 3 weeks. Let's call him Tim. I still didn't know the culture or the city very well, and I was extremely naive about everything. He eagerly wanted to meet for a date after talking to me, and he seemed very nice. I should have asked more questions. I should have noticed he was not giving me any details about himself. He was a guy a bit older than me, but claimed he was still a college student. I assumed he had done his military time, as all men in Korea have to, and returned to school after. We talked for a bit and decided to meet for a tea date near the school I went to. He wanted to come by my dorm originally to pick me up, but I live in an all-women's dorm, and I didn't want him to know exactly where I lived since we were still pretty much strangers. Instead, I insisted we meet at the main town center near the subway. He really didn't like this idea, which looking back is a huge red flag. But eventually I insisted. The night of the date, I waited for an hour for this guy. He was very late. Tim weirdly claimed he just wanted to make me wait. I thought he was just trying to kid and lighten the mood, so I messaged him a laughing emoji, assuming he was just lost. When he finally arrived, he was much smaller than I'd thought. But hey, man's height has never been something I cared about very much. He was also quite thin as well. Maybe I let my guard down because I didn't see him as physically threatening to me, which was a mistake in the end. Right off the bat, he was way too touchy with me, and breathed these really creepy, heavy breaths. I was very put off by this demeanor. I'm usually tolerant with very different personality types, but this was very odd to me. I had been told that Korean men would be very polite and not so touchy on the first date. He was also dressed really oddly, like in business attire. I thought maybe that was just a Korean thing though. Again, I was dumb and knew jack shit about the culture. The very first thing he said to me was, "You're not as white as I thought you were." I thought this must be a translation error, but his English was near perfect, so I asked for clarification. He said what he meant. "I thought you would be more white. Your skin is darker than I thought, and your eyes aren't green either. Are you pure European?" Now I was officially weirded out. First off, I'm pretty much as white as you can get. I'm Irish and Scandinavian, so white as hell basically. The fact that he thought I could have possibly been any whiter was very funny. And why did he care in the first place anyway? What does my skin color matter to this guy, and why is he bringing it up? He said about 3 times on the date how he wished I had greener eyes, and every time I would just reply, well, maybe my online photos make me look brighter. I brushed it off as him being nervous and trying to start conversation. Isn't it funny the dumb excuses you make for people when you're really panicked? When we arrived at the tea place, I tried to order a basic raspberry tea. He stopped me and told me I had to have this special tea. I thought it was weird he wanted to choose my drink for me, but in my head I tried to brush it off once again. He really insisted I drink only this tea, and I just agreed. These small details become even weirder in hindsight. After tea, he asked if we could look around my school. It was extremely dark, but the school was well lit, so I agreed. The whole time we walked around, he would try to randomly stop and grab me for these long hugs. At first, I let it happen, but then I stopped him. He would just keep trying, though. Just keep grabbing me and breathing hard into the back of my neck. It was so weird. He would also not tell me any personal details about himself. I asked him so many questions, desperately trying to distract from all this awkward grabbing and to try and get to know him, but he would never tell me a single thing. He even at one point said, "I'm just a mysterious man," like a movie line. Finally, he said, "I want to go to a dark area." In my head, I screamed, "Fuck no." At this point, I wanted this over fast. He somehow knew there was this completely isolated wooded area behind my campus and said we should go there. I said no, and I wanted to stay near the main campus in town, but he started really pushing. Finally, he just grabbed my arm and started dragging me there. He said to me, "I can't let anyone see this," and I started to panic. I ripped my arm away and demanded to leave and go back to the main road immediately. Looking back, I don't know why I didn't ask for help or get angry. I guess I was too scared. I just began to book it back to the main road, and he followed behind me. We ended up in front of a hospital near the center of town, where I finally told him it was time for him to go. I made some excuse, but he was pleading with me to stay. I told him maybe we could meet the next day, obvious lie, and I would message him. I just wanted to get away at this point. I was pretending it was all okay so he would just leave. Suddenly, I think he's leaning in to kiss me. I immediately think, oh God, no. But it was so much worse than a kiss. Instead, I immediately felt a sharp pain in my face. It took me a second to realize, but he was biting my face. Like a dog. I had never felt something like that before. He leaned his head sideways and bit into my nose and cheek as hard as he could. I screamed and pushed him away from me. His face looked so freaky, and I barely had time to react in words. Instead, I ran up the sidewalk until I saw a convenience store on the right. I ran to the back of the store and bent down to start crying. The man who owned the store started to yell at me, but I couldn't explain my situation adequately. I begged him in English to let me stay. I ended up having to buy a popsicle just to stick around. God, I wish I had learned some Korean by then. I guess Tim didn't follow me. I peered outside the store and didn't see him. I texted a friend and waited for them to come take me back to my room. On the way, I messaged him and basically told him to stay the hell away from me. I told him he was a creep. What the fuck was that about biting me in the face? And something along the lines of me calling the police for an assault. Then I blocked him. I was so scared to walk around my school area after that. I was afraid he would find me somehow. I'm thankful I never let him pick me up at my dorm. I called my mom to tell her what had happened when suddenly she said, "Wait, what did he ask you?" Then she put the details together and realized all these weird things had to do with 50 Shades of Grey apparently. At first, I thought she was just being silly and overthinking a bad date. I thought she was joking, but on further introspection, oh God, she was right. She had recently seen the movie or read the book or something and knew the details. The eye color, the way he dressed, the special tea he made me drink, those random lines he said, it all matched the books and movies for his dirty little fantasy. My mom thinks he picked me because I look like the girl in that movie to him. It explains why he was so fixated on my appearance, and his whole thing with the biting and trying to dominate me, even if it wasn't his intention. I later learned that apparently there are creeps who seek out foreign girls to dominate and have sex with like a prize. They call it riding the white horse or something along those lines. On a happier note though, this bad experience didn't stop me from dating. I eventually met someone else in Korea, and we ended up falling in love. We even did the whole long-distance thing, and I'm now living in Korea studying and working, hoping to marry him soon. So I guess the moral is, don't let bad, creepy guys ruin and stop your life. This was in 2004, when I was 20 and living in a small 2-level apartment on the main floor of a building. Out front there were 3 stairs, then a deck, then 3 more stairs to the front door. Add another little narrow deck that ran the length of the front of my apartment, which beside the door was all windows. The main floor was this tiny kitchen/living room, and a door to the hallway for laundry and parking access, all of which was completely visible from the windows. It was fall in Western Canada during daylight savings, so pitch black early and surprisingly warm for the season. I had all my windows open and hadn't closed the blinds so a breeze could get in. I was talking on the phone to my sister. I had my back to the windows, and when I turned around, I thought I saw something weird outside. It was really bright inside, so I turned the main light off, only to see a man pressed against the window, staring at me. I screamed and told my sister a man was on the deck looking at me. As soon as he noticed I'd seen him, he seemed to take off into the darkness. I turned off all the lights inside, put the outside ones on, and was babbling to my sister like, holy shit, a peeping Tom, so scary, I can't believe it. All of a sudden, he just walked right back up to the main deck. I screamed again. He's back, I have to call 911. I hung up and did. He pressed his face against the window. It was still open. The windows were floor to ceiling with screen cranked open bottom sections that I had to open to the max and could for sure accommodate a determined person crawling in. He could hear me and see I was calling 911, but he didn't do anything. I had crouched down in the dark room and the main light was off so he couldn't see where I was, but I had the lights on beside the door to the hallway and on the stairs to the bedroom. I didn't want to move and let him know where I was. I should have run into the hall and banged on a neighbor's door, but I was in shock. After all, the cops were coming from a station only 10 blocks away, so surely they'd get here soon, right? The 911 operator said this: "We can't find your address. I'm directly behind the rec center at X and Y, corner unit unmistakable area landmark, and the only apartment building there." The man at the window starts banging on the glass. I can hear him whispering to me. I was whispering, but I assume he heard me give panic directions repeatedly, and we both can't hear the sirens. I felt like this would go on forever, when he finally just ran off. I peeked out to see a police car, so I told the operator they were here. Then the car started to drive away. The operator told me to go outside and flag them down. I don't know why I actually did, because I was scared shitless. When I did, though, they rolled down their window. Ma'am, do you need help?" "Oh, you're looking for me, I think? I just called 911. "Oh, we were just driving by, but what's the problem?" They never found the man that looked in on me and made me feel so unsafe that I moved. But it was truly the cops not even being able to find the only apartments behind a notable building that completely shook me. Frightening end note? When I moved out, they tried to charge me because the downstairs screens were shredded from my cats. The screens were pristine the day the creeper showed up, and that was the last time I opened the downstairs windows or blinds, or even used the front door. The property manager laughed and mocked me, and called BS when I said someone cut them, until I showed her the police report. She lived there too, and after that, well, suddenly it was not so funny. First day moving into student halls, I was greeted by a very friendly guy called Dominic. He was very camp and told me he was gay very early on in the conversation. I didn't really have a problem with that. He offered to help me unpack in my room and then go for a drink with me. Although I thought this was a little over-familiar for someone he just met, I was delighted that I had made a friend so quickly, and so I accepted his offer. He put a tremendous amount of effort into helping me put everything in the appropriate places in my room. We then went for a drink at the student bar. I made a point to tell him that I was straight, as I suspected he might have a bit of a crush on me, hence why he was being so nice. He didn't show any signs of dismay though, he just continued chatting friendly with me. I liked him a lot. He was very intelligent and quite interesting to talk to as well. I was very pleased that I had made such a promising new friend already. I was worried that I'd be a little bit lonely in the uni dorms by myself. He didn't live in the same building as me, just lived across. I was studying creative writing and he was studying for business, but we started to hang out a lot. Although I liked Dominic, I did start to find him a little bit overbearing. He would send me texts and message me on Facebook all the time and get very upset if I did not reply, even if it was only for about 5 minutes. He would always want to know what I was doing, and if I disappeared off Facebook for a while, he'd want to know where I'd been all day. One time I even sent him a text mentioning that I was on a train, and he texted this back: "Why are you on a train? Why am I not invited to wherever you're going?" I was on my way to a part-time job. I made quite a few other friends, and he would always show visible signs of displeasure whenever they were around, and whenever I talked about them. He would tell me he disliked them, and that I shouldn't trust any of them. He was very possessive, and I personally can't stand clingy friends. So I tried to distance myself from him a bit. The more I pulled away, though, the tighter he grabbed on. I still hung out with him and still cared about him. He was my friend, after all. But I was starting to worry about just where this friendship was going. I was fairly certain this guy had a crush on me, and very soon my suspicions were confirmed. I met this girl at a party I went to, named Anna, and asked her out on a date. She accepted. I was really thrilled and told Dominic all about it. The second I told him, though, his face completely fell. "Why are you going on a date with her?" he asked me, sounding very worried. 'Cause I want to," I said. "But I'm going to be jealous. Please don't go, it'll really hurt me. You don't want to hurt me, right? I'm your best friend." I had never actually told him he was my best friend before. I found the way he was acting now both annoying and a little bit creepy. "I'm sorry, but I told you I was straight before, Dominic. We can still be friends, but I'm not going to stop dating just for you." He remained sulky and miserable the rest of the night. I told myself that he'd have to accept it and get over it soon. But when I was on the date with Anna, I kept getting these mysterious phone calls from unknown numbers. I answered the first one, but I couldn't hear anything on the other end. It was just as though someone was listening. I started to ignore the calls, but you would not believe how frequently they started coming in. They were coming non-stop, and I couldn't even tell the time because the notifications would not stop. I had to put my phone on airplane mode. After about an hour of my phone being so, I switched airplane mode off. The very second I did, the calls started coming in again. Although I was very unnerved by this, I really enjoyed my date with Anna, and we agreed to meet up again soon. When I got home from the date, Dominic was waiting right outside my dorm, phone in his hand. "How was your date? Did you like her?" he asked, sounding miserable. "Yeah, I do. Was that you who kept calling me?" "No, but anyway, I've been meaning to tell you, I hear Anna's a massive slut. She sleeps around with loads of guys. You should stay away. I'm sure she'll break your heart." Now, Anna had no mutual connections with Dominic, so I asked him how he could possibly know this. He just told me he'd done his research. I was very angered and told him it was none of his business, and I'd find out for myself. He started crying, saying how he was just worried about me, and stormed off. I think he was hoping I'd follow him, but of course I did not. I went to my room, angry he would even try to interfere with my life like this. I mean, I've had unrequited crushes on friends before, but if they don't feel the same, I never try and force it. Dominic only got worse, though. When I got back to my student room, Dominic had sent me screenshots on Facebook of a conversation he'd allegedly had with Anna. The messages showed her boasting to him about how she was using me and how she was planning to break my heart. Obviously, this did not ring true, as one, how would she even know who Dominic was and why would she message him? And two, why would she tell a very public friend of mine so openly that her plans for me were to break my heart, when he would obviously show me? I demanded he show me the conversation from Anna on his computer physically with me there. He told me he had deleted the conversations because they were too upsetting for him to read. I knew right then and there that Dominic was deliberately trying to ruin my relationship with Anna through incredibly deceitful and despicable means. I told him that I wasn't interested in him. I never would be, and he'd better stop right now. He cried and told me I was being a terrible friend, that all he was doing was trying to look out for me, and he couldn't believe I was believing a stranger over him. I was seriously pissed off at the way he was selfishly trying to manipulate me now, so I blocked him on all social media. He started sending me constant texts immediately, calling me non-stop every day, telling me things like he was so depressed over me that he'd started taking heroin and was contemplating suicide, basically trying to guilt me with worry. He also would constantly send me things saying he knew Anna was cheating on me after me and her started dating properly, and that I had to come to my senses eventually. He was creeping me out so much that I went to stay with my parents for a bit, as I wasn't comfortable living in the same area as him. I blocked his number because the phone calls were so constant. People from my uni dorm were sending me angry messages because Dominic had told them a really twisted version of what was going on, making them think Anna was a dirty, STD-ridden whore who I had betrayed him for. It turned out he had been lying to everyone, telling them that me and him were in a romantic sexual relationship and that I had cheated on him with Anna, then left him for her. I furiously set everyone straight, told them I'd never been in a relationship with Dominic and everything he told them about Anna was bullshit. Most people believed me, although it took a while to convince everyone that Dominic was the liar. He was very good at being manipulative, and although his lies were ludicrous, he was good at making himself sound legit too. I decided to go back to the dorm after a while, as it was inconvenient for me to stay at my parents' while at uni. Their house was quite a distance away. I arrived back quite late, as I really didn't want to run into Dominic. I was so angry about him. I had a new girlfriend and my studies to think about, yet because of his weird obsession and harassment, he was now all I could think about instead. In a very twisted way, I think this is what he wanted, positively or negatively. He wanted me to be thinking about him. When I got back, I laid down in my bed, thinking about what to do, when suddenly, smash! A huge brick came flying through my window. I jumped up a mile in the air and rolled over the side of my bed, hiding for a moment. I thought it was burglars coming in or something, but nothing more happened. Once I got over the shock, I cautiously stepped over the broken glass and tried to look out the window when I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it. It was Dominic, and you won't believe what he said. "Hey, I just saw Anna throw a brick through your window and run," he shouted. "I told you she was bad news, man. You should have listened to me. I told you." You would not believe the rage I felt. I was so angry I couldn't even speak for a moment, but I just exploded. I screamed at him that I knew it was him and I was calling the police right now. He tried to protest, but I hung up on him and immediately called them. When they arrived, Dominic was not in his room, but when it was opened up, a large stash of illegal drugs were found there. The manager of my student halls assured me that he'd be getting kicked out for this, and the police said they would be getting in touch with him as well. After this, I never saw Dominic again. I changed my phone number and never unblocked him on any social media. A couple of times I was tempted to out of sheer curiosity, but I decided it ultimately was not worth it. I think he dropped out of uni, but I'm not entirely sure what happened to him. My relationship with Anna didn't last. She was never quite clear on why she ended it, but I suspect Dominic's freakish behavior scared her off, even though it wasn't my fault. Oh well, I guess life goes on. A few years ago, I entered the University of Lausanne to start my medical studies. I had just arrived in the city and even in the country. I was very excited to start my year, to discover the university, to meet new people. Everything was going great, until the end of the third week. Friday night around 9 p.m., I leave the library, say goodbye to my friends, and start to go home. The pace of work was already very intense, so we had been working all day, and I was in quite a rush to get home. It was my favorite part of the day, because I'd put on my music, take the subway, then the train, and it gave me a chance to rest. Anyway, that night it was cold, so there was no one left outside. It took me about 7 minutes to walk from the library to the subway. I'm walking quietly with my music in my ears, when all of a sudden, I get this shiver that runs through my body from head to toe. I started to feel uncomfortable, as if there was someone watching me. At that point, I paused my music and decided not to turn around to check in case the person was trying to be really inconspicuous, and if I did notice them, they might pounce or something. I didn't want to run either though, because I wasn't sure if I could run faster, and I didn't know where to run to either. At this point, we passed a glass building, so I decided to look inside and pretend I was fixing my hair. I quickly glanced out of the corner of my eye, and my blood runs cold. There was definitely someone walking a few feet behind me, standing there in a hoodie. I tried to reassure myself. Surely he's just finished work. He's just heading home. He's cold and that's why he's wearing a hoodie. But I didn't see a backpack, and there were no houses for civilians around. I decided to send a message to my mother, saying, "Come and get me in front of this building, please. I really don't like what's going on here." It's important to know that the university is 30 minutes by car from my house. At this moment, I didn't find any other solution. I decided to take refuge in a building while waiting for my mother to come and get me. As I was about to go back, I opened the door, took off my headphones, and went down the stairs to find a hiding place. We entered by the 3rd floor. I thought I was out of trouble when I suddenly heard the door I came in through open. This time I was sure he was after me. But since I'm new here, I don't know this building, and I don't know where it leads either. I run downstairs at full speed. I hear behind me the footsteps of the guy running downstairs to match me. I run without looking back, being sure that he was running faster than me, and he would eventually catch up to me. I don't even know where I'm going at this point, but I pray to God that I don't fall into a dead end. Looking back, I even think that it was really like in The Shining, with the labyrinth scene. I didn't know how far ahead of him I was, so I opened a window in the hallway to make it look like I was out that way, and opened a door a little further down. It opened up to this huge auditorium in the pitch dark. I went down the stairs and hid underneath a desk in the middle. I put my phone on silent. My mom had been texting me a lot, asking me what was going on, and saying she was on her way with my dad. I texted her, "I'm in this building. He's looking for me. Please come quickly." I hid under that desk thinking I was screwed. My hiding place absolutely sucked if any light were shined on it, and he was going to find me any second. I heard a thud and a huge scream. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life as when I heard that scream. For 15 minutes, my mother was sending me messages telling me just to hang on. At the end of those long 15 minutes, waiting for him to find me, I finally got the message from my mom, where she said she was with the police. They were going to enter the building, and they needed to know where I am. I told them I was on the 2nd floor, because I had no idea what room I was in, or even which way I had gone. After 2 minutes, I hear the door of the auditorium open. It was the police that came to get me. Once they got out, they took my statement and said they would check with university management. The next day, they contacted us and said they saw on the surveillance cameras that there was indeed someone who had followed me when I entered the building. There were no cameras outside, though. Couldn't see the guy's face, so therefore, they had no idea who it is. They just said that security was going to do patrols at night from then on, and advised me to have someone walk with me when I went out at that time of night again. We never heard about this guy again, and I suppose that's good news. At the time this happened, I was 13 and female, so this happened 2 years ago, and I was fairly naive. I was a major introvert, only friends with a few people in my class. I wanted to be social, but I preferred to be alone and read or write, just the classic nerd things. In early November, I got a text on my phone that was from a few classmates, whose numbers I had. Around 1 or 2 I couldn't recognize as well. It was a group chat, asking if we wanted to hang out at night near a park at our school. My parents, being strict and paranoid, would never let me go. Luckily, or what I had thought was luck at the time, they were heading out for an overnight trip. They would be back around 4 in the morning, so everything just kind of fell into place. Once my parents left around 8-ish, I ran out the door and made my way to the park. The one thing I made sure to do was lock the door. My parents were quite paranoid after all, and it was their biggest thing that they had engraved into me. Once I arrived at the park, though, I noticed a creepy figure standing near the edge of the woods. No one else there seemed to notice it, and I had already had enough reputation as a weirdo who was true crime obsessed, so I didn't mention it to them. As the night drew on and on, I was having the time of my life, ignoring this gut feeling I had telling me to run. Every so often, I would look over my shoulder and see that the man was still standing there. Around 9:45, 4 out of the 10 people there had to leave due to their curfew. It was getting very cold as well and was nearly pitch black, with only a few street lights every so often. The rest of us decided to go as well, since it started feeling more and more eerie and quiet. The place we had been hanging out at was a field that was fenced in, with a few exits and entrances. A large, wide field with a small park in the back and our giant middle school behind us. The front of the field faced the empty road, and the right and left sides were surrounded by forest. All the people left were getting picked up by cars, meaning that they went the opposite way of the road, since that's where the parking lot was. The man stood by the right forest/road exit that I needed to take to get home. As I walked away from my group, I tried to steady my heavy breathing. I didn't want to be paranoid, but with all the true crime I listened to, it was catching up to me. The man was probably early 40s or late 30s, dark hair with a big beard. He was around 5'9", but at the time he might as well have been 6 feet tall. He stood about 10 feet from the exit I had to take, so when I got close enough to it, I ran for about 30 feet through the exit and through the woods. Once I felt safe enough, I started to just quickly walk through them, at least to get to the road. Suddenly though, I heard a snap and a crunch from behind me. I stopped walking for a moment and quickly checked over my shoulder. Just around 15 feet behind me stood the very same man, walking slowly toward me, almost as if he were trying not to be suspicious, but this only made my fear worse. I turned around and walked so quickly, I might as well have been jogging. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park we had hung out at, and I was not athletic enough to run all the way home. After about 7 minutes of walking fast, I was in my neighborhood. I knew that now I could run to my house if I had to, so I checked to see if he was still trailing behind me. To my horror, he was only 5 feet away. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. I could hear his footsteps behind me thumping across the concrete as he began to run too. I dove down an alleyway I knew well and tried to lose him in the park, making my way home even longer. I could hear his heavy labored breath, followed by his heavy footsteps as he tried desperately to keep up. I cut through houses, backyards, and front yards. I finally made it to my house and flew up the steps. I looked behind me, just to see that he had arrived at the bottom of my house stairs. I unlocked the door and burst through it, shoving it closed behind me. Just then I heard him hit the door with his whole body force. I ran around the house and locked all the windows, turned off the lights, and hid in my bathroom with a kitchen knife, just in case he got in. He didn't manage it, luckily. If this was a better world, that's where my story would end. But it doesn't. After a few months, I hadn't really told anyone what had happened, since I didn't want to get in trouble with my parents for sneaking out at night. I didn't really go out with anyone or any group anymore, and my loner status quickly returned. I began to write horror stories as a coping mechanism and never went out past 7 p.m. It was around February when a classmate of mine shared a story of some random man following her home from the bus. She described him as the exact same man who had chased me home that night. Another girl then mentioned that he sounded exactly like a guy who had stood outside the school and tried to follow her home one day. I didn't join in with my story, but everyone agreed that he must have just been a weird guy. He was kinda forgotten, and eventually I moved on too. Around May, I was getting ready to walk to school when my mom pulled me aside and showed me a picture of a man. The man who had stalked me, actually. She told me he had been arrested 2 weeks ago for sexually assaulting a child and had just escaped last night. She told me to keep an eye out for him and to call the cops if I saw him. I was shaking the whole time I walked to school. It haunts me to know that if he caught me, I would most likely be in her position, or maybe even dead. This might not be the scariest story, but it definitely creeped me the fuck out. For background, I'm a 20-year-old female. I matched with this guy on Tinder a while back. His name was Nick, and he seemed pretty cool, so I gave him my Snapchat. We talked a little bit, but it died out very quickly. I didn't tell him the exact town I lived in, but the city about 10 minutes away, because it's decent sized and has a big population of people. I figured he wouldn't be able to find me just by knowing that tiny bit of information. A few weeks ago, he started messaging me again and we made a bit of small talk. Everything seemed normal for a while, up until New Year's Eve at least. The day before, he messaged me, saying he was going to be in the area, and asked if I wanted to meet for lunch. I told him possibly, and that I would let him know in the future. The next night, I had a New Year's Eve party with a small group of friends. I spent most of the day getting ready, and was not looking at my phone. Around 7:30, I finally looked at Snapchat, and saw Nick had not only messaged me, but also had called me. "Hey, I'm an insert name of my city." I responded telling him I was sorry, and I'd just seen his message. He opened it within minutes and totally freaked out. He said something along the lines of, "Just to let you know, I'm not really interested in someone who can't even answer the phone when I drive 6 hours just to see her." I looked at that message in disbelief, and for a second I thought he must be joking. I responded by asking him what the hell he was talking about. He didn't drive 6 hours just to see me. That's when he said we had made plans. Why else would he have ever driven up here? I was confused because we had never confirmed. He told me he was going to be in the area anyway, which made me think he was here for work or to visit a friend. It's not an uncommon thing. I explained this to him and told him we did not have plans, and I didn't ask him to drive all that way for me. He told me he'd sat around for 2 hours waiting for me, and even bought me flowers. Again, I was very confused. We'd never planned a time or place to meet, and I never confirmed plans either. You don't make plans by just telling someone you're going to be in the area. I apologized, but told him we never had plans. He told me to make it up to him I had to drive up and see him tomorrow. Yeah, fuck that. At that point, I remembered that I had my location shared on Snapchat, so he could have easily shown up at my house. I turned off my location, but kept him on Snapchat in case he tried to do so. Luckily, I've not heard from him since. My dad is a retired police officer and has a gun, so I'm not afraid to use it either. When I finished college a few months back, like so many millennials, I had a wee crisis of finances and decided to move back home for a few months, saving up money and all that, you know. Now, my parents live in a small town. Not quite rural, there's at least 3 churches, but nearly everyone knows everyone, or at least everyone knows everyone's people. New people do move in fairly often, but they either settle into a church and get some people real quick, or they just move on again. Crawdaddy did not move on again. He didn't get no people either. He just kinda stayed there. Let me go back a bit. When I decided to head back home, I didn't yet have a job lined up. There was this little coffee joint in town though. Pretty good for a non-chain in the deep south actually. The owner, she went to church with my parents. I'd helped her out at the shop a few times, filling shifts on the register and like. She was always short-staffed, so of course, Hanners was my first call. Sure enough, she gave me a job on the spot. Now here's the thing about working register in a coffee shop. You meet some weird, very creepy people, and usually when it comes down to it, they're just awkward. You get mouth breathers and people who don't make eye contact normally, and those who lean too far in over the counter and try to touch your hair. Mostly people that keep asking if you got a boyfriend, pretty little thing like you. Maybe a few ill intentions, but mostly just a lack of social skills. I can sympathize with those kinds of people. I mean, I'm awkward too sometimes. Actually, a lot of the time. So I sorta just deal with it. Brisk smile, step back from the register, gotta go check something in the back. If this was any one of those incidents, I'd post it over on Creepy Encounters instead. As I settled in over my first week as an official employee, I got a lot of people asking if I was new. Obviously, fam, obviously, or you wouldn't even be asking in the first place. Of course, they really just wanted to know who my people were and where I fit in. That's how these kind of small towns work. So I'd tell them, be all friendly, and after they left, I'd ask my coworkers, only 2 or 3 of us at a time, who exactly they were. One evening, a week or 2, or maybe even 3 by this point, this guy comes in about 20 minutes before closing. Immediately an awkward vibe. He starts in with the usual though. You're new. Yes, my man, you want to order? I've got floors to mop. Of course, I was being more polite out loud though. Can I get, a large coffee? I'm tired, you know. I work in the kitchen just down the road, at Crawdaddy's. So I grab his coffee and ask if he's got an account with us. A lot of regulars do. Oh no, I ain't putting my name in no sort of computer. They get you that way, you know. Okay then, buddy, okay. He never did tell me his real name, by the way. We only found out from the arrest record way down the line. So he leaves, and I ask my coworker what Crawdaddy's deal is. He doesn't know. The man's got no church, no family, nobody really knows. Just comes in after closing the kitchen down and grabs a coffee. Bit odd though for someone with no kin. He'd been around for at least a year. Still, not my problem though. A few weeks, months go by. I start getting more and more closing shifts. I'm pretty nocturnal anyway. I start seeing Crawdaddy more and more though. Used to be he only came in once a month or so. Then it was every couple of weeks. Then once a week. He got more awkward too. Most people kinda pick up the hints and sorta know to drop it. Crawdaddy starts asking me if I'll come to his table and start putting in cream and sugar in his drink for him. He starts asking me more and more about myself. Do I like the job? How's Hanners as a boss? Where did I go to school? What part of town do I live in? Would I want to come waitress down at Crawdaddy's? I shut all that down real quick though. Finally it hit the point where he started asking me every night when I get off though. Stupid question honestly. It's not like he doesn't know when we close. But still, it was making me uncomfortable. I'm not exactly fixing to call the cops on a guy just because he's bad at reading social cues though. So instead I worked out a thing with my coworkers, where if they saw Crawdaddy coming, I'd buck out to the back and putter around till he was gone. This worked for a grand total of about 3 days. Then, as I'm chilling in the back, I hear him ask my coworker Asa if he's alone that night. None of us ever work alone. There's always at least 2. Well, nah, I'm sure she's around somewhere. Crawdaddy ambles over the counter to put cream and sugar in his coffee, and stays. I'm waiting for Asa to come give the all clear, but it never comes. The minutes tick by and finally Asa tells him we're closing. But where is she? Asa says he doesn't know. He's gotta close. But I want to see her. Asa gives him a sorry man and tells him to get. He finally leaves after a while. Neither of us were too sure what to think of that. I decided to head home and call Hanners in the morning. Sure, it wouldn't be the first time she's had to tell a customer to back off. When I do call her, she asks me if I want to switch to afternoon shifts for a while. Life goes back to normal after I do. Afternoon is fine, busier, but still pretty good. Then a week or 2 later, Ivy's girlfriend dumps her. She has a bit of a mental break, and I end up pulling a double through closing. Sure enough, in rolls Crawdaddy, with me and no time to hide. Oh, you're back. You're still working here. Yeah, pal, just move shifts around to avoid you. What's up, large coffee? Are you not working nights anymore? You should work nights, you know. I can only come in on nights. I tell him it's all a bit flexible. Never really know when I'm working. Sorry about all that. No, that's not right. I know Hanners gives you your schedule a week ahead of time. You told me that. You told me lots of things. You should, give me your schedule. so I know. Asa came back from wherever he inconveniently was, and I ran to the back. I stayed there until suddenly Hanners popped in, which is weird. She's got kids. She doesn't work nights. She tells me to get on home and she'll call me after close. Turns out that after I locked myself in the back, Crawdaddy kept pestering them for my schedule. They didn't want to call the cops either, so Hanners came in to tell Crawdaddy to back off. When she arrived, he was halfway over the counter, trying to grab the printed sheets under the register. Joke's on him, though. They're just recipes. She banned him from the store after that. Straight up told him if he showed up again in the next year, it'd be counted as trespassing. I was very grateful, but I also needed a bit of a break from all this. I asked her if I could take a bit of a holiday week after next. Head to the beach for a few days. Now, I'm pretty reliable, and we were in the calm before the busy season. Also, Hanners is a great boss, so of course she agreed with me. We set it so that I'm back on the nights for a few days, then a mid, then an open. I wanted the open shift so that I had a full day free to drive. She's nice enough to not make somebody close one night and then open the next day. Of course, we weren't sure that Crawdaddy wouldn't still try and show up, so we made sure I was closing with male co-workers as well. Every night we've got someone in that shop who open carries. 6 days. That's all. Day 1, sure enough, Crawdaddy comes walking down the street. Jason goes walking outside, holster on hip. Crawdaddy immediately turns himself around. Day 2, nothing. Day 3, nothing. Day 4, nothing as well. But, now, I've got to explain something about the way I drive. Now, everyone starts driving young in this town, and you sort of just learn to pay close attention to other cars. If you know how many cars are around you and how fast they're going, you know whether or not someone's in your blind spot, and if you've got time to switch lanes, whether or not you should do an overtake. It gets to the point where it's not even conscious, it's just sort of a thing that happens. I leave work on day 4 and start heading home. I pull out of the lot. There's a couple of cars on the road. Take my first turn. There's a few trucks and a beat-up white sedan. Second turn, now just 2 trucks. Third turn, lose a truck, the sedan, and gain a red sedan. Fourth turn, I overtake the red car in a black truck. I was getting more out of town now. Fewer streetlights. Another turn, both cars still with me. Another and the same. My next turn is onto this dark, windy road. No lights at all on it. It's bendy, but there's no offshoots. That black truck turns in behind me. The red sedan carries on past us. The speed limit's gone up. I hit the gas, check my phone, check my mirrors. The black truck is suddenly gone. There's nowhere it could have gone. There's no turnoffs. It didn't overtake. And I would see the lights through the trees even if it was way back. In that funny way your mind does, my brain flicked through all the options and decided they must have crashed. Out-of-state plates, they don't know the road, it's bumpy. I slam my brakes. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a flash of movement. I twist. This asshole had cut their lights and was sitting in my blind spot. I do like any reasonable person would and peeled out of there like the proverbial bat. The fucker was still behind me. No hands to call the cops, no time to think. I was already too close to home. My parents' driveway had no real security, and neither did the house. I wasn't about to risk all that. But they've got a back way. There's this nature reserve outside of town. It's all gated off, and you gotta get a pass if you want in. People who work there get them, and a few other people who live in houses that butt up to it. The gates are electric. You just drive up and they open and close behind you. I start building up speed. The truck matches me. It's too close. If I go in the gate, the truck's just gonna follow. So I build up more speed, drive past the entrance, and pull a handbrake turn. I get through the gate and I can see him stopping and turning. The gate was taking its sweet time closing, and the first road through the reserve is straight and wide. If the truck got through, there was nowhere to hide. Instead, I backed into a lay-by right inside the gate, just in time. The truck came roaring up. At first, I thought I was just gonna smash through, but the brakes squealed and it stopped. And it sat there. My heart was beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. We were 20 minutes from town. Cops weren't gonna get here soon. I call my brother instead. He grabs a gun and jumps in his truck, and starts heading around the outside. The black truck just sat there sitting. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Then there's Paul's truck. Just like that, the black truck jumps into action and peels off right away. Paul comes through the gate and we call the cops. He managed to get the digits off the plate, and I remembered the state. 911, we explain. They put us through to the sheriff. Hey, you're the Hayward kids, aren't you? You've been having trouble with that guy at the coffee shop, haven't you, miss? Well, let's just check these plates then, because... Wait a second. We wait. Well, it looks like those might have been fake plates. Listen, y'all, we'll keep an eye out, but it was probably just some poacher trying to get onto the grounds. Y'all get to bed, and I'll send somebody around for a statement tomorrow. I was pretty sure it wasn't, but I wasn't raised to argue with a cop, especially when trying his best to make me feel better. The next day is my mid-shift. Day 5, and I'm desperate for the beach. Cops take my statement, and I'm sure I rambled on about how ready I was for that holiday. Day 6, I wake up to my alarm and a text from Hanners. She's already up with the kids, and since she's up, she felt like working. She told me she had it covered and to just get on the road. I was not looking to look a gift horse in the mouth, so I got on my way. I'm gone for 6 days as planned, when my mom calls. My sister a few states over is having a rough time and needs help with the baby. Mom already called Hanners, small town, and she was cool, so I could just go help my sister. I was gone 2 more weeks. I get back to town and there's a big weight off my chest. I'd probably just been overreacting to the whole thing anyways, right? Some people are just awkward, and it looked like Crawdaddy got the message. He didn't show up anyhow. Weeks go on and we get some new employees. We throw a party, and as it happens, we start talking about our most obnoxious customers. Y'all know Mocha Frappe lady? Well, and you know that guy who gets a caramel macchiato but wants us to say a cappuccino? So of course I jump in with, God, y'all remember Crawdaddy? Silence. You could cut the air with a knife. But no one was looking at me. Everyone was looking at Hanners. I need to tell you something. Let's go outside. Apparently, the day that I left for the beach that I was meant to open, the police had caught Crawdaddy breaking into the shop with a knife, duct tape, and a phone full of pictures of me leaving work. A black truck with false plates was parked out back. The state pressed felony charges, and my family made sure I was out of town until everyone knew he wasn't getting bail. I don't know how long he was locked up for, and honestly, I don't want to. I live pretty far away now anyways. This is going to take a while to explain everything, so try and stay with me. It all comes around. My very first car was a dark green 2000 Volkswagen Jetta. It was the most basic of basics when it came to cars. No options whatsoever except for an automatic transmission. It was $300. Slow, dumpy, no right headlight, drove straight with the steering wheel practically sideways. Let out a cloud of white smoke when it started, too. Every stereotype of a poor high schooler's car you can think of. My car was no exception. Despite it being a piece of German crap, I loved that car. I drove it every chance I had. I don't think a day went by when I didn't drive it. Named it Thunder Bunny, too. She was my baby. My beautiful green baby. But Volkswagens from that generation, Jettas especially, had a pretty bad flaw in the automatic transmission. I'm not sure exactly what causes it, but essentially the transmissions gradually get worse and worse until the car can no longer shift into third gear. There's not really a thing you can do from there. So a couple of weeks after Halloween 2019, I was going around 30 miles per hour when the engine suddenly roared and the car wouldn't speed up. I feared the worst, and my fears were justified. My dad, a mechanic, didn't even have hope for my baby. She was gone already. And so, much to my dismay, I started looking for a new car. It only took about a month for us to find her. A dark green 1999 Volkswagen Jetta. Exactly like my old car, but everything. She was faster, had heated leather seats, auto windows, auto sunroof, everything. all except for an automatic transmission. I knew how to drive manual anyway though, so it was pretty much perfect. I had a new baby now, from the crackhead neighbor girl to Scarlett Johansson, at least in my eyes. I loved that car even more. I named it Little Boy, and I was very happy. Okay, I'm about to get to the story, but I have a few more quick things to explain. You can skip this if you want. It's important to understand how the car works, but it's not vital to the story itself. First is for people that want to know but might not. When you have a manual car, you cannot leave it in gear and take your foot off the clutch. If you do, the car will stall, which is bad. So if you do leave your car in gear, you need to turn the engine off before taking your foot off the clutch. If you don't want to turn the car off or have it turn itself off, you need to pull the handbrake or it will roll away. Guess what the only really broken thing on my car was at the point this story takes place? If you guessed the handbrake, you're absolutely right. And that was the second thing. No handbrake. Okay, now on to the story. I started working as a pizza delivery driver in a smaller growing town in Michigan. It was good money, but every once in a while I delivered to an incredibly sketchy place. I've had a few shotguns pulled on me in my day. One night about 2 months ago, I was delivering on a Friday. Usually Fridays are very busy, but this day was a little bit slow. So when a delivery came in at 8:30, half an hour before we closed, I jumped right on it. I realized it was 7.1 miles away, so all of the closing jobs would be done by the time I got back. I would have been able to leave immediately. It was way out of town in a wood-surrounded neighborhood. But again, no work when I got back to the store? Seemed like a good deal for me, and I'm all about those sorts of deals. And so I climbed into my car and went to drive 7.1 miles away. As I pulled up to the house, I began to get a bad feeling though. The house was in a small trailer park type neighborhood right next to a lake. The kind that the houses are all a good distance apart, with likely a drug problem, and it was completely dark. No lights inside, no one inside. There was a single car in the driveway, and an open window on the side of the house. I pulled in behind the car in the driveway and sat there for a moment. Something was off. By the house being completely dark, I mean there wasn't even so much as a nightlight that I could see. Usually when I deliver to a dark house, there's at least some light on upstairs or something that would signal someone being awake waiting for a pizza, but this house seemed completely dead. Nevertheless, I put the car in gear, turned off the engine, grabbed the small, cheapest pizza we had, and got out. Without my headlights on, there was nothing. I could barely see the house. The only light was the dim moon. I walked onto the porch and passed the big open window to the front door. As I reached it, I saw it. The door was slightly cracked open, just enough for me to see into the void of the house. Thinking of every single horror movie I've ever seen in my life, I said aloud, "Fuck that," and hurried back to my car. I'm a tall, well-built looking guy, but despite my wide shoulders and baggy hoodie, I'm actually quite a frail thing. I could hardly fight off a small dog. I got into my car and turned on the engine. My headlights illuminated the house, and almost simultaneously, the living room light behind the big open window lit up. A single guy looked out and walked out the front door. I cussed to myself and weighed the options. If I went up to that door, I could die. If I noped out of there, though, I would 110% be fired. That meant no new car parts, no gas money, no cute dates with my girl, just sitting at home doing virtual schoolwork. It was a stupid choice, I know, but I grabbed the pizza and opened my door. Making a choice I'm damn glad I made. I took the car out of gear and climbed out, mostly so my engine would still be running so that if I needed, I could run back and immediately take off. I walked up to the door where the man had opened it the rest of the way. As I got closer, I got a better look at him. I'm not one to judge a person based on their physical appearance, but the guy's head was cleanly shaven and covered in tattoos. He was wearing a pair of gray jeans and a white tank top. He had a scowl on his face too and was staring me dead in the eyes. I looked past him for a moment into the house, which I saw now was completely empty. As I got close enough that I started opening the pizza bag, he started to reach around his waist. I stopped. He was staring at me with the most evil grin I had ever seen. I knew in that moment I was about to die. I had always heard your life seems to flash before your eyes. I thought about my girl, that she wouldn't know what had happened. My work would stop delivering upon my disappearance, assuming that my body wasn't ever found. My dad would regret telling me he was happy for me landing this job. God save thee. That's when I heard it, though. The distinct sound of gravel under my tires. My only pathetically small chance of escape was now rolling away. I didn't even look back at the car to know that. I just stared at the man and was about to say "fuck you" when he looked back to my car. I heard the sound of the car rolling, but from the sound of it, it was getting closer. The guy's eyes went from the driveway to behind me. Finally, I looked over my shoulder. The car had rolled backwards and come to a smooth stop near the mailbox of the house. I looked back at the guy, who now had a nervous look. He looked back at me, scowled again, and took his hand from around his waist. He reached into his front pocket and took out $12 and handed it to me. I gave him the pizza and watched him slam the door shut. I ran back to my car and practically tore the door off the hinges trying to get in. I looked back at the house. A man was standing in front of the window staring out at me. You better believe I nearly spun the tires on my way out of there. I kept glancing at my mirrors until I started driving under streetlights. It was easily the scariest moment I've ever had. As soon as I got back to the store, I told my boss about it, and she called the police. We never heard anything about it. I assumed they went to the house and only found a small cheese pizza. After that, I started carrying a knife on me at all times, and my boss is considering getting trackers for our pizza bags. Only recently, I realized this is sort of a butterfly effect. I thought it was the worst thing ever that my transmission went out, and I cursed Volkswagen for designing such a terrible automatic transmission. But if that transmission was still working, then I would have still had that car when this happened. I would have put that car in park and it would have sat there, while whatever would have happened to me would have happened. I have zero doubts in my mind that that man was planning to murder me. So shitty German engineering ended up saving me from getting murdered. I'm mostly a lurker on here, but have considered sharing my story several times. I was hesitant because absolutely no one knows about this. Not my family, nor my friends. I've held on to this for about 10 years now, and I figured now was about the right time to let it out. Plus, I think there are some valuable lessons that can be learned from my experience. So, here we go. Caution, long story ahead. For reference, I'm a 27-year-old female, and this story takes place about 10 years ago when I was 17. I had just started university and was excited about having a fresh new start. I'd always been a nerdy outcast in high school. Never had a boyfriend before, never even been on a date, so I was naive and optimistic about boys. My introverted and awkward personality hadn't magically changed since entering university though, so safe to say I didn't meet any interesting guys at school. One late night I was in my room working on an assignment on my laptop when I received a request on MSN Messenger. The email address was a boy's name and some random numbers. The name was clearly ethnic and likely someone of the same origin as me. Intrigued, I accepted. For the sake of the story, we'll call this boy Ken. We got to chatting, and I asked him how he'd even gotten my email address in the first place. He immediately dodged the question. I let it go, though, not thinking too much of it. You gotta remember, this is from a time when it was normal to accept anyone and everyone as a friend on Facebook and other similar social media platforms. As Ken and I continued to talk, I learned that he lived in my city, and apparently he wasn't that much older than me. As I'd guessed, our roots were in fact in the same country. Let's call it Motherland. I asked him why he didn't have a picture of himself on his display, and this prompted him to suggest that we turn on our webcams because he wanted to see me too. I declined, but he insisted. Somehow he convinced me, and we both switched on our cameras. I was pleasantly surprised and somewhat relieved to see that Ken was really just a good-looking young guy. chatting to me from the comfort of his bedroom, seemingly very normal. Our MSN chats carried on for a couple of weeks. They developed into texts, and we even had a few phone calls after I agreed to give him my phone number. I started to develop a bit of a crush on Ken. He'd asked me to go out with him a couple of times, but I was always pretty busy with school and our schedules just weren't lining up. Finally, though, we found one afternoon when we were both free and decided to schedule a lunch date. Ken had a car and had offered to pick me up from my university after I was done for the day. I was a little bit too dressed up for my C+ programming class, but just right for the lunch date we had planned at a local vegetarian restaurant. Somewhat stupidly, I did not tell any of my friends where I was going, or with whom I would be going either, because I was embarrassed about going on my very first date, at almost age 18, with someone who had randomly added me on MSN. I waited outside my building when a black car with heavily tinted windows pulled up beside me. The passenger side window rolled down, and sure enough, there was Ken, sitting in the driver's seat. I was happy to see that he was as cute in person as he was on webcam. However, I wasn't expecting the intense smell of weed that wafted out of the car. Not relevant, but it was a startling first impression. Admittedly, I was a bit taken aback and was concerned he might be driving while high. He unlocked the doors and motioned for me to get in, so I did without dispute. As I sat down in the passenger seat, he immediately placed his hand on my thigh. I nervously shifted my leg away a bit. "So, do you know where the restaurant is? I can guide you if you want." He smirked at me but didn't say anything, and just started driving. Okay, kinda weird. I thought maybe he was just nervous or awkward, both of which I could definitely sympathize with. I was about to try my hand at a little bit of small talk, which I'm generally no good at, when I noticed him heading towards the highway ramp. I started to worry, because the restaurant was not far away from my campus, and there was no reason for us to get on the highway. You don't need to take the highway there. The restaurant is really close by. I can guide you." I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear my own nervousness. Ken finally spoke, for the first time since I had gotten into the car. "I thought maybe we could just go to my place instead. We can play Need for Speed and I can make some lunch for you." I was 17, on my way to the house of a guy I'd just met for the first time, and I hadn't told anyone where I was going either. My mind was racing. I knew this was an utterly stupid thing to do. Despite the clear red flags waving in my face, though, I decided I didn't want to ruin our first date by rejecting his offer to make me lunch and play Need for Speed together, which I'd told him I liked a lot. So, like an idiot, I reluctantly agreed to avoid being rude. We made it to his house eventually. It was apparently his family's home and was situated in a sort of shady neighborhood. We stepped inside, and of course I noted that no one was home except us. It was sparsely furnished and looked unkempt, which struck me as pretty odd for a supposed family home. He informed me that his Xbox was in his bedroom. I hesitated in the doorway, but he sat at the foot of his bed in front of the TV and patted the empty space beside him for me to have a seat. There was literally nowhere else to sit in his room, so I cautiously took my place, keeping as much distance as I could between us. I started to relax as we began playing, and he made us PB&Js to munch on. I was about to laugh at myself for being overly paranoid when Ken did something really bizarre. He got up onto the bed and sat down directly behind me, his legs on either side of me, and tried to guide my hands on the controller. I started to ask him what he was doing, and as if this wasn't uncomfortable enough, his hands moved from the controller and slipped up under my shirt. That's when I really started to panic. I thought he was going to try to grope me, but instead he started squeezing and massaging my belly. I was more than a little chubby back then, freshman 15 and then some, so you can imagine what that might have been like. I dropped the controller in shock and stood up, fixing my shirt. I was at a complete loss for words. He did nothing but smirk at me and tell me he liked it. I felt disgusted and violated, though. I'd had enough. I lied and told him I had a group project to work on and needed to go. He asked where I lived so he could drop me home. Thankfully, I still had the common sense to not tell him, and I asked him to drop me back at school instead, where I would supposedly be meeting my classmates. He obliged. Well, after our very uncomfortable first date, I decided I did not want to talk to Ken anymore. I didn't block him on MSN or my phone, our only two methods of communication, but instead I just ghosted his messages and ignored all of his calls. Once, he messaged me on MSN around 11 p.m., asking me to come over and telling me he would send a cab to bring me over to his place. Thoroughly annoyed, I responded, "What do you take me for? Why do you even think I would want to do that?" He continued trying to get in touch with me for months, and then suddenly he just vanished. I figured now he'd finally gotten the point. Now, I wish the story ended here, but of course, it does not. I'd last heard from Ken in late February. He had stopped trying to contact me shortly after Valentine's Day. In April, 2 nuclear family members and I went on holiday to visit another relative, who we'll call Anne, who was living in the Caribbean at the time. Anne, who I love dearly, was and still is a bit of an eccentric. She considers herself very spiritual and is an active member of a large, well-known spiritual organization. She's deeply connected with Motherland, more than the rest of us are, and goes back for frequent visits as well. While we stayed with her in the Caribbean, she told us about her most recent spiritual trip, where she met a wealthy and well-connected local woman through the organization, who quickly became a very close friend. Let's call her Connie, short for con artist. During our visit, Annie introduced us to her virtually over Skype, because Connie lives in Motherland. We chatted with her a couple of times throughout our vacation and got to know her a little bit. Little did we know back then that Connie, who Anne had spontaneously met halfway across the world in Motherland, would soon wreak utter havoc on our lives. Now, that's a story that I'm just not and may never be ready to tell because of just how many lives were affected and the severity of the damage inflicted. What you do need to know is that she was an outright criminal and con artist who had been targeting our family from long before Anne had actually met her. Their meeting was no coincidence. Not only did she manage to steal over $100,000 from our family, but she took any peace of mind or sense of security we had ever had. When we finally caught on and confronted her, she insisted that we were mistaken, but disappeared into thin air once we forced her out of our lives. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering, what the hell has this got to do with my story about Ken? Well, get this. The situation with Connie lasted many months. The whole thing is a bit of a blur to me now, but we first spoke to her online in April, and I remember the whole ordeal lasting well into the fall. While she normally resided in Motherland, Annie had invited her to visit and stay with us, where we presently live. That's when things took a turn for the worse. Some of the things I clearly remember and are important to the story were that 1. The whole time she was staying with us, she was trying to convince me to transfer schools to a very obscure school and program in the US. I don't even live there. She was getting very pushy about it as well. 2. She had asked me if I was a virgin and told me to save myself for my husband. During this time, I was so emotionally drained and stressed that I didn't really think of anything but the situation at hand. In fact, I had stopped socializing almost entirely, and had even started habitually skipping classes. I had lost contact with my high school friends, my university friends were too new to really care, and so my strange behavior and new destructive habits went unnoticed. Fast forward to one day, after Connie's final disappearance in the fall. I was at home with my dad when my cell phone rang. I looked at the caller ID, and it was a number I did not have saved. It was showing the contact information as whatever name the phone was registered under. My heart dropped to my stomach. My phone displayed a name. The first name was a man's name, and the last name was the same last name as Connie's. I started to panic and ran into my bedroom to answer the call. I had no idea what to expect. But when I picked up the phone, I was greeted by a very familiar voice. It was Ken. I honestly thought I was going to puke when I came to a sudden realization that he had been part of this whole sick plot from the very start. Of course, I don't have hard evidence to prove he was connected to Connie, but let me explain. The timing of his appearance and reappearance in my life, the last name, a fairly unique surname originating from the part of the motherland where Connie is from. I had never known Ken's last name until then, and the fact that he contacted me out of the blue, I had no idea why or how, but it was all just too bizarre to be a mere coincidence. Of course, I freaked out at Ken when he called me, and I told him that if he ever called me again, I would call the police. His response was just a weird, dry half laugh. Then, well, okay then, in the most creepy voice you can think of, and he hung up. I knew in my gut this was their last attempt to get back in touch and somehow slither their way back into our lives. Thankfully, I never heard from Ken again after that. A while after this all ended, I was having a conversation with a family member who was also closely involved in all this, about the whole ordeal. She told me she sensed something extremely wrong when Connie was pushing to have me sent off to the US to that obscure school. She had an unshakable feeling that Connie was involved in some sort of human trafficking scene, and that if I left, I would never be seen again. The horrifying pieces came together for me at that time. I was just too naive to have seen it before. The memories came flooding back to me when I heard that. How Ken had told me no sex, I promise, when he invited me over, and how Connie was constantly telling me to remain a virgin. As I said, I had never told a soul about Ken, nor the weird V-card conversation with Connie. I strongly believed that Ken had been some sort of player in this game, and was just there to keep me away from guys and prevent me from getting a boyfriend. For those who may be wondering, we never called the police on Connie or Ken, because technically nothing illegal happened at face value. It's very hard to explain. I'll also mention that I tried really hard to find Ken online many times after this all ended. I don't know why, I felt like I wanted to expose him or something. I was not able to find even a sliver of information on him, not by the name Ken, nor by the name on the caller ID. It was as if he just suddenly didn't even exist. I'm awful at remembering things, so I didn't remember the address he'd given me or where his house was exactly. I'm sorry if this story is a little convoluted or confusing. I'm trying to get my point across without giving out any specific names or too many details, which makes it a little bit challenging. I hope this can serve as a warning to young people, though, to never trust anyone who you don't thoroughly check on, especially those you meet online, and to be very aware and weary of people's intentions. Also, from this incident onward, I can no longer stomach a lot of those spiritual organizations. Never really liked the idea of them to begin with, but now I've experienced truly how they can attract both vulnerable people and also unsavory characters who are looking for those vulnerable to prey on. No judgment for those who are into that sort of thing, just definitely not for me. I would like to hear what you guys think about this, though. Do you think my suspicions are plausible? What do you make of it?
This happened in the summer of 2010, when I was just entering my teenage years. My family took a trip to a really nice hotel in the city. I can't really remember why we decided to take the trip, but I remember a lot of family friends coming with and staying in adjacent rooms. I've never asked my parents, but it's not really that important to the story. To preface this, I'm a bit of a scaredy cat, and I always have been. I'm a pretty skinny and fragile kid, so I get spooked very easily, even now. This, however, was almost definitely not me freaking myself out like I normally did. Looking back, I'm incredibly lucky I trusted my instincts. This hotel has a strange design to it. The lobby was actually on the 4th floor, not the bottom floor, which I found strange. To access the lobby, you had to use the elevator. There was no way for you to get to it from the stairs. This information would have been nice before everything happened, as you'll soon find out. The hotel was organized in a square shape. Every floor was lined with a balcony, and you could look down into the lobby and cafe area from your floor. Essentially, if you were walking to your room, you could be seen from anyone that was on your floor if they just stepped out of their room and looked around. I was always afraid I'd fall over the balcony and sail down 8 stories to my death, but they were high enough to a point that I wasn't too concerned for my safety. The first day or two was nice. My friends and I hung out and played cards all day, or we watched whatever was on TV. At night, we'd explore the halls of the hotel and tell each other spooky ghost stories. It was a really fun time, even though I didn't fully understand why we were even there. On the 3rd day, though, things got strange really fast. I woke up to the sound of screaming coming from outside my door. Now, because of the hotel's design I mentioned, sounds from the lobby would echo all the way up to the top of the building. When I walked outside to investigate, I looked over the balcony to see what the commotion was about. I saw a girl laying on the ground, eggs and milk splattered everywhere around her. People were rushing to help her, and I heard a couple people telling each other to call 911. It seemed like the girl was unconscious. Maybe she had passed out or something. I scanned the lobby and saw that my family and a couple of my friends were in the lobby getting breakfast, all staring at the event in front of them. I decided now would be a good time to rush down to meet them to find out what exactly had happened. The elevator was on the opposite side of my floor, so I took the stairwell located right next to my room. We were on the 7th or 8th floor, so I knew I only had to take about 4 flights down. Not a big deal. I descended for a little while looking for the number 4 on the wall or the letter L. I passed floor 5, ready to find a door to the lobby. I took about 2 more flights of steps before realizing there hadn't been a door for the 4th floor, nor had there been a door for the 2nd or 3rd. At this point, I probably should have turned back, but I continued downward because I was tired and didn't want to climb all the way back up. There were all these weird side hallways that went into pitch-black areas with a bunch of piping and wiring, and though I was curious to explore, I passed them by. Quickly, I hit the bottom floor, a dimly lit and cold room with cinder block walls and concrete floors. In front of me was a set of double doors. I hesitated at first, but I assumed that this was just another way back to the lobby, so I opened them and entered. Behind the doors was a massive warehouse-type room, probably the size of a smaller basketball stadium. The only light coming in was from the stairwell behind me, so I really wasn't able to see much. The stairs were stacked and covered in plastic wrap. Tables lined the wall, and in the distance I thought I could see boxes stacked and lined against the wall as well. I was probably in the storage room for the hotel. I looked around and saw an elevator at the back of the room, so I made my way towards it. I closed the door to the stairwell and began to walk in the dim light. The room was super muggy and dusty, and it seemed like nobody had been down there for a very long time. As I got closer to the elevator, I noticed that it was a little bigger than the elevators in the lobby and other floors. I pressed the up button, but got no response. There was a card swiper next to the button. It must have been for employees only, I thought. I turned back toward the stairwell doors, making my way past the chairs and tables along the wall. When I got to the door, I gave it a tug. Locked, of course. This is when things started to hit me, and I realized I was stuck in the dark, dusty basement of a hotel. I didn't have a phone because my parents wouldn't let me get one until I graduated middle school, so I couldn't even call anyone for help. Everyone likely assumed I was still asleep in the room, so I began to freak out, believing that nobody was going to look for me. I searched all around the warehouse, looking for other ways out. Some areas of the place were better lit than others, so I looked around at areas I could see first, before starting on the darker side of the room. There was one other set of doors that I found, but that one happened to be locked as well. I began to cry, and I was scared that nobody would ever find me in this basement. I swear it felt like hours, but I think only a handful of minutes had passed before I heard the door creak open. It wasn't the door from the stairwell, rather the second door I had found. A slim, middle-aged man in a lab coat came out of the doors. Now, if this was 21-year-old me seeing this man, I would be very confused as to why this man was wearing this outfit in a hotel. I was only 12 or 13 at the time, so I was immediately relieved at the sight of an adult who looked smart. I approached him with my eyes full of tears, and he immediately looked surprised to see me, as you'd expect. "What are you doing down here?" he yelled. "I got lost on my way to the lobby, and I've been locked in here. Do you have a key?" I was shaking and eager to get out of there. He didn't answer my key question. Instead, he said, "I know a way out of here. Follow me." He began to walk towards the doors with the stairwell, and I followed, relieved that someone had finally come to save me. We approached the doors, and I began to reach for the handle, but he continued walking right past. "Isn't it right here?" I asked him. I'll never forget the look on his face when I said that. He looked nervous, and though it was dim, I could see sweat dripping from his forehead and forming up behind his glasses. "No, it's this way," he said sternly. I continued to follow him, but I was now nervous myself. We had passed the door to the stairs, and were now headed toward a darker side of the basement, away from the elevators. He looked like he had no clue where he was leading me, as he kept checking around him, almost as if he was taking in the surroundings for the first time. We turned a corner and began walking towards the boxes, a dead end. I immediately froze, realizing that something was very, very wrong. This man had no idea where he was going, nor did he appear to work at the hotel. I said to him with my voice shaking, "Where are we going?" He turned to me and said, "This way. Just follow me." I knew that there were no doors by those boxes. I had checked there first after I found out that the stairwell door was locked. I want to thank whatever God is up there for gifting me with the idea I had next. I started yelling, as loud as I could. I yelled so loud that I started to give myself a headache. The man, irritated and plugging his ears, began yelling back at me, "What are you doing? Be quiet!" I continued to yell. I don't even remember how long I was yelling for. Finally, the man snapped and began quickly walking towards me. I went in a full sprint towards the stairwell doors, hoping to God they'd somehow be magically open. He didn't run after me. He walked sternly behind me, muttering things like, "Stupid fucker." I was about 5 feet from the door when somebody burst through. My savior, a hotel janitor who had heard the screaming from the stairwell. He saw the situation, me and some random man in a lab coat in a locked basement, and immediately he told me to get behind him. The janitor asked me who the man was. I said I had no idea, and that he had come in through the door on the other side of the room. I pointed towards the door. The janitor quickly radioed into the desk that he had found a child in the basement, and quietly, presumably so I wouldn't hear, he said, "This man came from outside. Get security," or something like that. The man in the lab coat started trying to argue with the janitor, claiming that he was simply looking for a bathroom. The janitor clearly wasn't buying it. "Wait till security gets here, and you can talk to them about it." I was standing behind him the whole time, trying to take in what was happening, confused out of my mind. Eventually, an employee from the front desk arrived and took me back up the steps to the lobby, where I met with my family. They had no idea I was even missing. I told them the story, crying and shaking, and they hugged me tightly, thanking the employee over and over for their help. I never got to thank that janitor, though. Looking back now, I have no clue what that man was doing in the basement. I don't have any information as to what happened afterwards, or even who he was. I know for a fact that the incident with the girl in the lobby was unrelated, something about low blood sugar. I've thought about that day a lot, and the only explanation I can put together is that door that I had found in the basement led to the streets of the city, where he must have wandered in from. I have no clue what his intentions were, why he was wearing a lab coat, or why he chose to pretend to know a way out. To be frank, this could have been a misunderstanding of some sort, and I just chose a really bad time to get lost. But all I know for sure is if I hadn't screamed my lungs out, I might not be telling this story the same way, or at all. My aunt is a seamstress who works from a shed in her garden that's been adapted into a sewing room. A couple of weeks ago, she began to have debilitating back pain, which stopped her from being able to do most things, including bending over a sewing machine. She sells her stuff online and has had a recent influx of orders for the Christmas season. The back pain has come at the worst possible time. She taught me how to sew as a child, so to help her out a bit, I've been going to her place after my day job, spending the evening sewing in her shed/studio, and sleeping in her spare room most nights. This is exactly what I was doing last night, when my aunt got a strange WhatsApp message on her phone. She didn't tell me about this until the next morning, which is only a few hours ago at the time of this writing. Now, a bit of background. Since a couple of months ago, there's been a scam circulating on WhatsApp that has affected most of my friends and family. The messages will go something like this. Hey, you need to ring X urgently. From Y. Where X is the name of a random contact in your address book, and Y is the initial of the person that supposedly sent the message. However, the message won't come from their number, but a random one. In fact, the message is sent by an anonymous third party, and neither of the others have any knowledge of the messages. I've personally never gotten one of these, until today. However, my brother was the first to receive them. He called his provider to report them, and the provider said it was likely a scam company trying to get you to call the random number so they can charge an exorbitant amount of money for calling them. They also said they couldn't track the numbers to a single place, but they have tracked them bouncing off towers all over Scotland and Wales. We live in England. They advised him to report each message to WhatsApp. They never come through any others, and advised everyone else to do the same. So last night, when my aunt got a message from a number she didn't recognize, she did exactly that. She reported the message without opening it properly, which immediately removes the message from your inbox. Except this time, she got another message before she'd even had the chance to put her phone down. This message was a picture from a number she didn't recognize. She opened the message, but she didn't tap on the picture to open it, because she was afraid that action would allow hackers to enter her phone. She's a bit of a Luddite. However, she could tell even from the blurry preview that it was a photograph of her front door. For those who don't know, pictures arrive blurry until you download them properly, unless you set your settings to do so automatically. Not only that, but it was a photo from the inside of her front door, taken from the entrance of the lounge and looking down the hallway. Accompanying the picture was a single line of text saying, "From G," as if a person with the G initial was signing off in the message. She puzzled over who could have taken it or sent it for a while, but unable to walk far enough to come and ask me outside, and somewhat drowsy from pain meds, she forgot about it and went to bed. A few hours later, I finally turned myself in. I had a quick bite to eat, locked all the doors, and went to sleep. Nothing was amiss. This morning, I woke up on my day off work, and my aunt was feeling a bit better, so we went for a bite to eat in a cafe. While we were there, she told me about the mystery message she'd gotten. She was more puzzled, but I was immediately alarmed. She couldn't show me the message as she'd reported it as spam, but she's definitely not the type to make something like this up. I've lurked on this sub for a few years now. This definitely raised a red flag for me. I was still wondering whether or not to inform the police on our drive home, but my aunt was afraid of making a fuss over nothing. I took her back to her place, made sure to check every room, door, and window, and stayed for a cup of tea. As we were sitting there watching TV, I got a WhatsApp message on my phone. I open it, and it's a blurry picture that I can't quite make out. The sinking feeling in my gut tells me I already know what it is. I open the picture, and there on my phone is a perfectly clear photo of the front door from the inside. I turn my head slightly to the left and look down the exact same hallway towards the exact same door. While my aunt asks me what's wrong, I stand up, walk to the lounge door, and point my phone at the front door. It's the exact same image. The same door, wallpaper, carpet, ornaments, everything. It comes from a number I don't recognize and is accompanied by a sign-off from G. In my panic, and this may be the stupidest thing I've ever done, I immediately pressed report. Before I realized what I've done, the message, the number, and the photo were all gone. I told my aunt and she was horrified. We're both very rational people, so we tried to put our heads together and come up with an explanation. We tried to match up the numbers under G in our address books. Mine is a cousin who's never even been to my aunt's house. He confirmed this when I called him to explain. And hers is the same cousin, as well as an old business associate who has also never been to her house. I called around my family to let them know what had happened and asked the stupid question, "Do you happen to have any pictures of my aunt's front door on your phone?" Of course, nobody does. Not even my aunt, so it's not like someone is somehow sending her her own photos. Also on WhatsApp, you can tell when a message had been forwarded from somewhere else. As far as I recall, this message was not forwarded. We're both familiar with the scam mentioned above, and the random initial sign-off does make a connection, but the picture is particularly chilling. Nobody I spoke to had ever received anything other than text requests to call a random person. We have no idea where the picture came from, when it was taken, or who by, but I can be certain that whoever it was took it from about 2 feet away from where I sit typing this right now. My aunt has lived in her house for a decade, is very friendly with her neighbors, and has no known enemies. She's never had anything like this happen before. I explained what was happening to her neighbors and told them to make sure their houses were secure. I also asked them to keep an eye out for anyone suspicious and to call the police if they see anything. The worrying thing is that often when my aunt is sewing in her shed, she leaves her front door unlocked. She also always listens to her radio when she's sewing, so she wouldn't hear anyone in the garden. The shed is immediately opposite the front door. It's insulated, and I can attest that the hum of the machines and the radio, you often couldn't even hear people knocking. Sometimes my uncle is home, but he's often away on business, and that would leave the house totally open to intruders. My aunt is checking for anything that might have been burglarized, but she hasn't noticed anything out of place. We don't know if this could be a weird phone issue, a scam, or even a prank, but I've read enough of these stories to know that this could possibly be the beginnings of something creepy. I've thought about reporting this to the police, but neither me nor my aunt have the messages to show them, and nothing seems to have been moved or taken. There's absolutely no evidence that the pictures were taken by an intruder in the first place, so I'm not even sure what they could do if we did tell them. My uncle is coming back to town tonight, so I won't be staying there, but I do think it's strange that the only time I've ever gotten a strange message like that is when I was sitting in the same room the picture had been taken in, almost as if someone knew I was there. Otherwise, why not send it last night? I've had a few stalkers in my life, and quite a few weird things happen, but none of these things bother me still like this one does. I was about 7 or 8, back in the 80s, when I answered the phone one day. The man on the other end somehow pulled me into a conversation. I don't remember what we talked about, or why he said he was even calling, but we talked for over an hour. I don't remember anything creepy from that conversation. Not that one, anyway. Over the next year, he called 6 or 7 times maybe, and each time we talked a little bit more. He usually just let me talk, all that I wanted, and I told him a lot of things. I don't even really know why. Maybe it was because he was the only person who ever listened to me, and didn't blame me for everything. He was always sympathetic and on my side. My home life at the time wasn't that great. He also had this raspy voice that was slow and soft-sounding. For about 5 years, he would call for a few weeks at a time, every 3 or 4 months. Eventually, he told me that he had traveled a lot, and was only in my area at certain times of the year. He also told me that he worked with children, but never told me what. Over those 5 years, his questions got more personal, more leading, and more sexual. But he had earned some kind of sick trust from me, and though I was reluctant, he eventually got me talking about sex. By the time I was 13, I knew that our conversations were wrong, and I started to avoid the phone. I never answered if I could help it. Whenever he did catch me answering, he would always make me feel bad for avoiding him, like I was his only friend or something. And sometimes I felt like he was my only friend too. Around that time, he told me a story of a girl around my age that he had messed around with at a camp or something, how she'd asked him to touch her somewhere. I felt very uncomfortable when he told me, but I continued to be nice. I was a little afraid of making him mad. I don't know why, just my instincts, I guess. One day he called and told me that he'd seen me that day, walking home from school with my friends, and told me even what I was wearing. I was thoroughly creeped out by now. I was beyond scared. I don't know why I didn't tell my dad, who was a police officer, by the way. I guess I thought I'd get in trouble because of all of the things I'd told the man. Then the man asked me to meet him at a Walmart parking lot near my house. I told him I would, but I had no intention of doing so. My phone rang so many times that night, and I wouldn't answer. When someone did answer, there was never anyone there. I pretended like I didn't know anything about it. I stopped answering the phone altogether. I made scheduled times for my friends to call, and I never walked home alone again. I never talked to him again either. And he did call, many times, all the way up until I was 16. He would ask for me and I'd say that he had the wrong number, and hang up as soon as I heard his voice. But that's not the end. In 2005, I was in college. I was about 30 at the time, and I was driving home from class. I was flipping through stations on the radio when a voice caught my attention. I kept listening, and I was certain it was his voice. I was dumbfounded. It was a Christian radio talk show, talking to a guest who was a youth pastor who traveled around. I know it was him. He even told some of the stories to the station that he had told to me before. I listened the whole way home. I got home and turned it off and tried to forget about it. After a few days, I thought I should contact the station, but my radio wasn't on the station anymore, and I just couldn't figure out which one it was. In 2015, I was visiting my sister, who is 20 years older than me, and we got around to talking about it. I told her a little, and she told me. He had talked to her too a few times, but she didn't know he'd ever talked to me. She didn't know who he was, or how he even got our number. I still wonder if he's out there still, preying on young or vulnerable girls, or just what. I hate thinking now what he might have done to someone by now, and I hate that I never told my dad. Even though nothing bad actually happened to me, it did affect my whole life. Mainly the way I am with my kids. No one ever understands why I'm so overprotective, even of my adult children now. I don't trust anyone outside my inner circle, and I eye everyone as a potential creeper. It's kept me and my kids safe, I guess, but it never allowed for much living. This encounter wasn't too long ago, and solidified in my mind why I will always close the blinds at night, and why even in a quiet suburban neighborhood, you should always lock your door. I've been reading creepy stories online since I was about 12, when I first discovered Tumblr and Reddit creepypasta, Sixpence, No Sleep, and of course, Let's Not Meet. I've long since taken to checking all the windows and locks before I go to bed, and closing blinds and curtains for fear that I might look out and see some creep in a clown costume with a knife in my garden, or a child with their head turned to an unnatural angle. I always sort of wished I had had a creepy encounter so I could write about it. But if I ever have another experience like this, for the rest of my life, it'll be too soon. For some context, this nice suburban neighborhood, as I say, is home of my parents. A little town in Cheshire, England, a quiet street where we all know each other. The crime rate was low, except for one house which had been heavily burglarized twice in about 10 years, both opportunistic. Once because the keys were near the door and the invader smashed a small pane to reach them, and the other time because they'd left their blinds open overnight, leaving their laptops, wallet, and both car keys on full display. Anyway, I don't live with my parents anymore, but I was back in town and staying with them for a few days over summer. I was sat in the kitchen, which faces onto the street, and working on my laptop, just glancing up occasionally to watch people pass by walking dogs or strolling with a pram. I'd seen something moving in my peripheral, so every time I looked up hoping to see a dog walker or our neighbor and her newborn grandson. Nope. 2 people, a man in a semi-casual suit and a woman in plain jeans and a blouse, but they were moving strangely. The woman had her head craned over to one of her shoulders, and her arm on that side was bent backwards and unnaturally upwards, with her hand rhythmically flicking. Her other arm randomly but smoothly glided out, guided by her elbow. It was a bit like when you try to push 2 magnets together at the same point of polarity. That's how I'd describe it. I have friends with epilepsy, and I've never seen them contort or flick around like that, not even in their myoclonic jerks. The man looked more like one of those dancing inflatables you'd see at a used car dealership. That's about the only way I could describe his strange movements. They walked past my parents' house, and I instinctively called to my cat to check he wasn't outside with those weirdos. I found him upstairs in my old room. He was looking out the window, and as I followed his gaze, I see 2 of the kid neighbors in the double burglarized house, waving across to me. Well, to my cat, I suppose, but I waved back all the same, from their parents' upstairs bedroom window. I went downstairs to tell my parents about the strangely moving people, and my dad just furrowed his brow, asked if they were gone, and said to double-check that the doors were locked. I headed back to the kitchen to check our back door was locked. This door didn't have any windows in it, so you can understand I jumped out of my skin when, as I put my hand on the door handle, it was pushed down from someone on the other side. I push on the door immediately, before anyone can push it from outside. I must have also screamed because I hear my dad call back. I hear his footsteps coming through the house, then I hear a loud gasp on the other side of the door, and out of the kitchen window guess who I see making a retreat? The creepy moving dude and dudette. By the time my dad made it through the house, they were long gone. He didn't seem to believe me, although he didn't seem to particularly doubt me either. He's never seen them before, so he takes a free pop at me for being discriminatory against potential house guests with movement disorders. We make jokes like this because I had a movement disorder as a kid, and one time a parent wouldn't let me into her son's birthday party because they would be playing Simon Says and I made it difficult for the others. I digress. Anyway, these people were gone. I don't sleep well due to that same movement disorder, actually. And those scary stories I read meant that I always listened to the excessive creaking in this house, the noises on the street outdoors at night, like people walking home drunk and foxes mating. Most of the sounds are quiet though, so imagine my shock when straining my ears in the dark, they're suddenly attacked by a child's scream. It takes me a second to locate the sound, and another to lurch from my bed to the window, looking straight over to the upstairs window, the same one where not 12 hours ago my neighbor's children were waving to me from. I scanned down the house and saw their front door wide open. I shouted to my parents, hoping to wake them up, as I flew down the stairs in my PJs, with 999 already dialed on my phone to report this likely home invasion, before I could do anything else. I'm remembering to scream fire and not burglar as I stride across the road attempting to wake other neighbors and gather support en masse. There are 2 kids and a teenager in that commonly burgled house, kids who I babysat for 10 years, and one of them just screamed at 2 a.m. with their door wide open. I make sure I say this all out loud to the emergency responder on the phone. As I near the door, I can see a figure inside moving frantically. So, after telling the phone responder what's happening and answering their brief questions, I shout into the door from a safe distance. Some phrases the police gave me to say. The police are on their way. We're right outside and we're getting help. Is anyone hurt? And to tell the intruders, we know you're there. Please don't hurt anyone. The police can help you. I get a response from the upstairs window and step back into the road to see the mother holding all 3 kids in her arms. She tells me the middle child, who's 9, found intruders on the stairs when she went to get a drink in the night. The girl, Imogen, tells me they're like clowns. Clowns? This extra detail is the straw that broke the camel's back, and my vision darkens. Shit, I'm going to pass out. The last thing I hear is Emmy telling her mom I said a bad word. I came to in the middle of the road, with a foil blanket on and a soft Octonaut's toy under my head. I could see a lot of blue lights, 3 police cars and an ambulance. I suppose that one's for me. And I can see my neighbors out of the corner of my eye. My hearing returns as Emmy tells me her little brother volunteered his toy because I hit my head pretty hard when I fainted. Suddenly I'm up and looking around to count all 5 of the family members and checking for injury. Over the top of their heads, I can see an arm frantically waving in and out of view. Yep, the moving weirdos broke into my neighbor's house. I see the woman standing still, her head still slumped to the side, just as she's lowered into a police car. I was later told that as I spoke to my neighbors in their bedroom window, their dad had gone to fight the intruders and kicked the woman down the stairs as she was climbing them. The man was the frantically moving shadow I had seen from the doorway. The police reckoned they'd been trying doors all the way down our street until they finally found one unlocked. I told them about the couple also trying our door earlier in the afternoon. I'm guided to the ambulance and sat on the bed, whilst the paramedics tend to a large cut on the back of my head from my fall. I vaguely feel them removing some gravel, cleaning, gluing, and dressing it, but I'm preoccupied watching 2 police try and contain the human dancing inflatable man. They can't catch both of his arms at the same time to cuff him, so eventually one policeman is cuffed to one of the man's hands, and thus has his arm flung every which way as the man continues to move. I have no idea what they've been tried with. It if they were just on drugs or had a weird movement disorder, or when the court hearing is yet, but as a key witness I'll be told when they need me in court. I would happily go the rest of my life without hearing a child scream at 2 a.m. and seeing these freakily moving creeps. When I was 10 years old, I lived in a relatively small town in Texas, in a small house with my mom. My mom has always been a very caring heart for those in need, so when my uncle called her one night and told her he ran into a homeless girl at the local park, my mom offered to help her out for a day or so, just to help her get her back on her feet, that sort of thing. When the girl arrived at my house, she told us that her name was Laura. Laura told us that she was 16 at the time. She seemed to be a bit of a shy girl. When my mother asked what she was doing out on the streets, Laura told us she had been kicked out of her home by her mom because her mother had accused her of sleeping with her boyfriend. Laura told us the allegation wasn't true. She told us her mother's boyfriend was the one who came on to her. My mom gave Laura a place to sleep in the guest bedroom that night. The next day, after breakfast, Laura asked to use my mom's house phone to call her mom to see if she could get some of her things from her mother's house. Laura's mom never answered the phone, and we all felt a bit bad for her. As a 10-year-old girl, I couldn't imagine what she must have been going through. Later that day, I remember watching TV in the living room and just minding my own business, but I could feel someone staring at me, so I turned my head to where I felt the gaze. Laura was sending me a glare so cold that if looks could kill, I would have dropped dead right there. I was confused and more than a little startled. I turned my head away from her quickly and went back to watching TV, but I could still feel Laura's cold gaze. I couldn't understand what I had done to her to cause her to look at me with such hate. The next day, it happened once more. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I could feel someone looking at me. I turned my head to the side and saw Laura's head peering around the corner right at me. Her eyes were dark and laced with hatred. It frightened me, and I felt so confused. Why was she looking at me like this? I didn't want to cause any trouble, so I didn't bring up Laura's death stares to my mother at all. Later that night, my uncle had joined us for dinner. He had stopped by to see how everything was with Laura, and if we had any luck finding her a place to live with one of her family members. After dinner, I was washing my plate in the sink when I heard a loud growling sound coming from the dining room. I turned my head to see Laura shaking and growling like some sort of wild animal. My mom and uncle both looked disturbed and worried. Laura threw herself onto the floor and began thrashing around and screaming as if she was possessed. I was absolutely terrified. It was a scary thing to witness. I grew up very religious. My mom and uncle began praying out loud for Laura while I ran right to my room and closed the door. This all went on for about 2 hours, but it felt like an eternity of horror. I could hear Laura screaming like a madwoman and growling like some sort of deranged beast. I don't think any of us knew exactly what was going on. After my mom and uncle had prayed for Laura for what felt like forever, Laura told us she was free from an evil demon that had taken over her. None of us were sure what had caused her behavior, and none of us were sure what had even happened. I peeked my head slowly out of my room to see Laura smiling happily while she curled on the couch with a blanket. Her eyes opened wide, and she shot a cold glare at me. I immediately closed the bedroom door in fear. I placed a chair in front of my door and went to sleep. I woke up the next morning to my mom waking me up. She told me that she was taking me out to eat at my favorite restaurant. When I asked her if Laura was going, she gave me a serious expression and spoke. "Your uncle is going to take Laura back to her mom's house. He slept on the couch last night after what happened. He and I were talking when the two of you have gone to sleep, and we pieced together that Laura might have made the entire performance up last night," she said. "She's not stable, and we both think she's dangerous." As I heard my mother say those words, relief washed over me. I got dressed and went to the car to go to the restaurant with my mom. When we got into the car, we saw Laura and my uncle getting in his truck with her. Laura looked angry. Her expression was of a child's when you don't give them what they want. She got into my uncle's car and they drove away. I'm 22 now, and I've never forgotten about this horrific incident that happened in my life years ago. After that day, I never saw Laura or heard anything else about her ever again. To be honest, I was a bit too scared to ask. This happened when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. I have a sister who's 8 years younger than me, so at the time she was about a year or two old. During the summer months in Calgary, Canada, my family and another 3 or 4 families would frequently have barbecues in Bonus Park. For those of you unfamiliar, it's a very large public park in Calgary that has a plethora of picnic areas, playgrounds, and fountain areas for kids to play in. The area is very large, so you'd have a 5 to 10 minute walk between playgrounds and picnic areas and bathrooms. Often, us kids would leave the adults to go play in the fountains or the playground, and it was generally safe enough that this never made any issues. I recall one time we went and were playing in our bathing suits, when I see this tall man with glasses and a large cowboy hat sitting on a bench just outside the fountain area. He was watching us. I was a naive kid, never had any prior talks about stranger danger or any of that stuff, and this cowboy hat made me automatically assume he was a park ranger or something. A couple of hours after leaving the fountains to eat and chill with the adults, my baby sister announced she needed to use the bathroom. She was nearly potty trained at this point, but not completely. My mother asked me to take her to the bathrooms, which were about a 10-minute walk away. My friend, who was about my age, came along with me. I just remember walking with them when a man comes up to us saying, "Hello," and trying to start a conversation. He was wearing a cowboy hat. Again, I assumed it was another park ranger. He was asking for our names and our ages, and just overall had a very friendly demeanor, so our idiotic selves talked openly with him. I did notice that he had a particular interest in my baby sister, and at one point even asked to hold her, but she was very fussy and wanted to walk. This went on until we reached the bathrooms, where we said goodbye to him and went in. Now this is when even my naive self started to feel like something was wrong. My sister ended up having an accident on herself, and I asked my friend to stay with her in the bathroom while I ran back to the picnic area to get a change of clothes from my mother. When I stepped out of the bathroom, I found that the same man was standing a couple of feet away from it, clearly waiting for something. That's when alarm bells started going off. I ran back to the picnic area as fast as I could and told my mom that I thought some guy was following us. She came back with me to the bathroom. When the man saw me with my mother approaching from about 100 meters away, he booked it, power walking in the opposite direction as fast as possible, without attracting any attention from anyone nearby. At the time, I completely forgot about what had happened. It wasn't until a couple of years later that I suddenly realized that the man waiting for us outside the bathroom was the same man who had been watching us play in our bathing suits hours before this. I can only assume he had been watching us for hours until we left the adults after we had gone swimming to approach us. Also, that particular park did not have any park rangers. I have no idea what his intentions were, but I'm glad I'll never have to meet him again. This story is fairly long because it took place over about a year. I'm a nanny and have been with my current family for about 2 years when the oldest started preschool a couple of days a week. I'd drop him off at around 9 and pick him up at 12:30, bringing his baby brother along with us. Now this school was very hoity-toity, and most of the families who sent their children were very wealthy. Everyone entering the building had to wear badges with our names printed out. Every entrance had a security guard and a metal detector. They employed about 10 security guards around the building that patrolled the place from open until closing time. I became very familiar with several of them because I'd passed them at their posts on the way in and out. Most were cops making a few extra $100 on their days off. Well, during the fall of 2017, the older boy moved to a new class on the other side of the school. This entrance was never as populated, so it was just a couple of people going in and out of this door during the day. The security guard was from a private company. He was always extremely polite and friendly. One of the nicer security guards, without a doubt. He was probably in his late 20s, and I thought he looked a bit like a young Santa Claus. Round with a jolly face and permanently red nose and cheeks, framed with a thick brown beard. Thin framed glasses and curly brown hair that went to about his shoulders. I eventually learned that his name was Nick, which only solidified my comparison. Months passed and we'd see each other 2 or 3 days a week. The boys loved to wave to him, and he'd always ask how our day was and we'd have a bit of a chat. In January of 2018, I came down with the flu and missed about 2 weeks of work. When I returned, I continued our regular schedule of school drop-offs and pickups. I was walking past Nick and waved when he stopped me and said he noticed I'd been gone for 2 weeks and he hoped I was feeling better. I smiled and thanked him and said it was the sickest I had ever been, but I was glad to be back. I found it a bit odd that he noticed and knew that I was sick. I assumed my employers had told him when they did the drop-offs and pickups while I was gone. I didn't think much of it and continued on, but when I went to leave he stopped me again. He told me he didn't know that I wasn't the boy's mother. I laughed and basically said people confuse me for their mom because I'm with them all the time and we kind of look a bit similar. He laughed too and then said, "I was wondering. I never saw you with a husband and you don't have a ring on your finger, so I thought you were just a single mom." I laughed nervously to this and didn't know what to say. I wanted to kick myself once I got back into the car. I was caught off guard, and I'm generally a bit awkward, so I tend not to respond the best when put on the spot. I guess I didn't realize he paid that much attention to me. I was a bit uneasy, but found it to be relatively harmless. The next drop-off day I said hello, and he responded by calling me by my name, which he never had done before. He told me I looked nice, which he'd definitely never done before, and I was very surprised. I started to think he may be interested in me, since learning that I'm not actually a single mom. This was a bit weird for me. I'm gay, and I also look very gay, so men very seldom take an interest in me, so when they do, I'm a bit weirded out. When I left, we exchanged a simple goodbye, and the rest of the week passed pretty non-eventfully. In early February, I was doing the drop-off yet again, when on the way out with a baby strapped to my chest, Nick stopped me. He was very courteous, but he asked me if I'd be interested in going to dinner with him some weekend. Again, I'm incredibly awkward, so my response was to laugh. I could see he was immediately offended. I apologized and tried to explain that I was actually engaged and had been in a long-term relationship. This was actually true. His face changed and he said, "Well, where's your ring?" The way he said this made me uncomfortable. I felt accused and defensive. I told him I didn't really like wearing jewelry to work, so I only wear it on the weekends. I had accidentally scratched the baby with the ring when he was just a newborn, and decided it wasn't something I could wear when I was caring for them. He didn't seem satisfied with my answer. but he let me go and told me to have a good evening. When I came to pick up the older boy that afternoon, though, Nick seemed agitated. I said hello, but he ignored me. Okay, I was upset, but I decided to let it go. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, but geez, could he not tell I was gay? The constant button-ups didn't clue him in. Did I need an undercut? It wasn't personal, so why was he so angry? When I left again, he ignored me once more. I swallowed and thought, oh well, he'll get over it. I had put the baby in the back seat of the car and was buckling up the 3-year-old when a voice behind me boomed. You don't have to lie to me. I whipped around, and Nick was about a foot away from me. I was grabbed between the car, the open door, and his body. He no longer looked like this jolly, polite young man. He was big, probably around 6'2", and easily 400 pounds. I was scared, and I was angry. How dare he come up to me and scare me? How dare he try to corner me and intimidate me when he knows I'm just doing my job? I hurried out of the doorway and shut the door and locked it, with the keys in my hand. I stood inches away and tried to back up. You don't need to lie to me. If you aren't interested, just tell me. I don't like liars. I didn't know this guy anything, but explained that I wasn't lying. I really was engaged and it was nothing personal. He was a nice, friendly guy and that I didn't mean to hurt his feelings. He was angry. He huffed. Oh, you didn't hurt my feelings. I just don't appreciate dishonesty. You lied about being their mother, so I figured you were lying about this too. I was mad. I had never once lied about being their mother. He assumed because I was the one doing the drop-offs and pickups. Our conversations never got beyond hello, good day, and goodbye until recently. I decided this one was over. He was talking down to me and accusing me of nonsense. I told him I never lied about this or anything, and didn't appreciate his tone. I went around and got in the car. He followed me, but kept his distance and said, I'm not even sure why I wasted my time on you anyways. I was shocked. He was a completely different person. I avoid altercations at all cost, so for someone to speak to me like this was very upsetting. I ended up disclosing my situation to the employers, who got very upset. They didn't like how he spoke to me, and especially didn't like that this was done around their children. They ended up contacting the school, which I was mortified about. I was terrified to see him again, knowing he'd know that it was me who told. That never happened. He was fired and replaced immediately with a retired cop, who was incredibly unfriendly, but I was grateful. I felt bad. I thought my employers had overreacted, but they were prone to such things, and honestly I was selfishly happy I wouldn't have to see him again. I was worried about how awkward it may be. I let it go and weeks passed, and the school drop-offs were uneventful. However, in May of 2018, that all changed. I live in an enclosed apartment complex in uptown Dallas. Our apartment neighbors a ton of bars, so we have some issues with break-ins and vandalism. We've always had police presence, but after an incident where some drunk guy broke into the office through a window, the office manager decided to hire additional security guards. Guess who ended up doing the night shifts? Nick, of course. When I saw him, I was checking my mail, and he passed me by in his uniform. I froze when he looked me directly in the eye and said, "Good evening, ma'am." Good. He must have forgotten about me. I was shaking as I went up to the apartment and immediately told my fiancée who I saw. She was aware of the situation with Nick at the old preschool, and being the daughter of a cop was always more suspicious and expected the absolute worst out of everyone. She didn't want him to find out which apartment was ours, so we started taking the back elevator and parking in a different area. He only patrolled the office area on the perimeter of the building, so we found it easy to avoid him for about a week or so. One day the back elevator was out of order, so I had to take the front elevator from the parking garage up to my apartment on the 4th floor. The elevator stopped in the lobby, and Nick walks on and I freeze. I guess he could sense I was anxious. He looked at me and said, "Don't worry," my name. "I'm not mad you got me fired, so just don't do it again." I didn't even respond. I got off on the 4th floor and then thought, shit, now he knows which floor I live on. I immediately ran inside and told my fiancée, and she said we should contact the management. I convinced her this was a bad idea. It could make him angry, and I doubt he'd let me go. He hasn't done anything. But did he follow me here? He knew me. How did he end up here? It seemed like too much of a coincidence. I will say we lived in panic. We kept our door bolted and installed a camera. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of that story of Jennifer Murray. She was a young lawyer living alone in an apartment similar to mine in Houston. She was stalked and attacked by her apartment security guard. He had access to her apartment. She survived but went through a horrible ordeal, and we were both terrified this could happen to us. Every noise terrified us. We'd get up to make sure the door was bolted several times before we could go to bed. That summer we were convinced he'd try something. Maybe just our overactive, worried minds. We ended up avoiding him for the most part. We saw him occasionally, but he didn't seem very interested, and though we were always weary, we figured he'd gotten over it and let our guards down. He never did bother me again. He never said much of anything to me when I did see him. I decided that maybe he was having a really hard time last fall, and he was actually a nice guy who didn't have the best social skills. Fall of 2018 rolls around, and I'm busy with work, and my fiancé is out of town often on business meetings. One weekend I'm home alone, and it's 3:30 p.m. I'm walking down to the office to get a package. Suddenly, there are about 3 police squad cars, and police all over the lobby and going up the stairs. I'm wondering what happened, but like I said, we live next to bars and we've had incidents with drunk assholes, so I figure someone had an altercation or something got stolen. I tried to get closer to eavesdrop, but I couldn't hear much. I go about my day, and then receive an email from my apartment complex saying they have a community-wide meeting scheduled to discuss the incident and go over resident safety concerns. I'm wondering just what the hell happened, so of course I go to the meeting. And guess what? A young single girl living in an apartment by herself showed up mid-afternoon to find Nick inside her apartment. She came in and her drawers were in disarray. He was hiding inside her closet and came up with an excuse when she found him. The security guards do not have keys to any apartment and aren't supposed to be in the resident halls. Later we all found out he has been stalking this girl and stole the keys from maintenance and had copies made. This has been going on for at least a month, if not longer. They found several of his belongings in his vehicle, and he was obviously fired and discharged. I didn't follow exactly what happened to him, but we assume he did some time. It was terrifying, and of course our apartment complex got the pants sued out of them. I was glad his attention shifted, but I wonder what could have happened to this girl. This wasn't the last time I saw or heard of him. A few weeks ago, over a year since I'd last seen him, I went into this big fancy mall in my city, and guess who was working security? My first thought was, you've got to be kidding me. My second thought was, how on earth does this guy keep getting security jobs? Who is dropping the ball here? I saw him and turned around, and walked right out that door. Thankfully, I'm moving out of state next month. We've lived in our neighborhood for nearly 4 years. A few houses down and across the street is a Filipino family. They're nice, and whenever we see each other, we always have small talk, and we know each other by name. We moved in right before I gave birth to my oldest, so they always ask for the baby, and he loves playing with them. We even had meals at each other's homes. This summer, they had an older family member, maybe 55 to 60 years old, come to visit. We noticed him right away, because he would always go for long walks and liked to linger a lot. One evening, the mother of the family introduced him as her father. He had recently moved and would be staying with them for a while before heading north to her sister's house. He was new to the US and spoke very little English, maybe just enough to get by. He seemed nice enough, but as soon as we walked inside, I told my husband that he gave me a weird vibe. I had never felt that way about any of the other 7 family members from the home. I'd been in their home and shared meals with them. They're very sweet and welcoming. My husband told me that he too seemed like he felt a little off, but we chalked it up to some cultural differences. Fast forward about a month. My mother-in-law and mother come to visit at the same time. They're in the driveway with our son. I run inside because I'm pregnant and suffer from severe morning sickness. I came back out after 15 minutes, and they were having a frustrating conversation with this man. He was trying to get one of them to drive him to the store, and he would use a food stamp and EBT card to buy their groceries. He wanted them to give him some cash. They both told him they weren't interested, but he just kept asking and lingering. When I went out, I called my husband to come out too, and when he saw us, he walked away quickly. Our mothers both told us what happened and how forceful he was. The next few days, I see him walking. We wave and say simple pleasantries, but every time I would wave, he would take it as a sign to come over and try to force a conversation. I let him know what he did with our mothers is illegal, and to be so forceful was unnecessary. He said that he understood, but he would just linger. It would always be at a moment where I was trying to strap my toddler in his car seat, and I was rushing to get him to school. It would take me 10 minutes to get him to get the hint that I couldn't talk, and he would slowly walk away and meander in our driveway. It got to the point where I would watch to see if he had walked past our house on his morning walk before venturing outside. I hated the awkward conversation. He would always seem to round the corner just as I finished strapping my son in the car and I was getting in. I would wave and jump in quickly and drive off. It just felt off, like he was waiting for me. Our neighbor across the street one night told me she got a weird vibe off him as well, and he always lingered. She told me he did similar things with her when they were outside. They were opting to hang in the backyard with the kids to avoid it altogether. Usually I work from home, but one day I went to the office and I was alerted by the Ring camera. This man was standing and looking in through our kitchen window, just peering, and I could hear our pit bull barking. When he saw our dog, he jumped back, and I used the microphone to say, "Can I help you? What do you want?" He looked shocked and scurried away. I called my husband and told him to play the Ring camera video. We both thought it was creepy as fuck. When we saw the family walking that evening, we brought it up with his daughter. She spoke to her father, and he claimed that it never even happened. We showed her the video on her phone, and he said he must have gotten lost. The daughter seemed annoyed by him and the situation. So him being weird calmed down a bit after that. I could see his daughter was annoyed with him, and as they were walking there was a heated conversation. She later told me he tends to be overly friendly, and that he means no harm, but she talked to him and he would leave us alone. I asked if it was a mental issue or maybe Alzheimer's, since he said he was getting lost. She told me he had always acted like that, and she couldn't wait until her sister was ready for him to be sent up north to her. A few other neighbors had complained about him to her and the homeowners association. About 2 months later, I dropped my son off to preschool. I got home and had to rush in because I feel sick. Usually I leave my car door open, but something told me to lock it as I got out. I did as I was rushing inside. I would also normally leave the door unlocked if I was just going for a quick throw-up session, but again, my instincts said to lock the bottom and top lock. When I was in the bathroom, right by the front door, throwing up my life, I hear a rattling. Someone is turning the lock back and forth. Of course, my ring chimes, and I look at it between heaves. It's the old man. He's trying to get into our house. I go over to the microphone and say, "You're at the wrong house." He responds, "Let me in, now. I want to tell you something." It's the best English sentence I've ever heard from someone who wasn't supposed to be that good at English. I felt better pretty quickly and was now on alert. I responded with, "What do you want to tell me?" He looked right at the camera. "Let me in right now. Let me in your house now." This is where I panicked. He knew he was at the wrong house, but he was still continuing. "Please get off my property. I don't feel comfortable with you here, and I'm not letting you in." He rattles at the door again hard and tries to pull it open. He starts knocking at the bathroom window. This is where I started to get pissed. "Get the fuck off my goddamn property. I'm not letting you inside, you freaking creep." He steps back and gives the camera the middle finger and scurries off. He disappears, and I run upstairs to see that he's simply walking back to his house. I let the pit bull out of our bedroom, where he had been going nuts. I call my husband, and he tells me to call the daughter. I call her and tell her what happened, and she told me not to let him in. She also warned me that he's been inappropriate and forceful with women in her family, and she didn't want me to get hurt, especially because I was pregnant. She came over about an hour later, and I showed her the video. She was fuming. She begged me not to call the cops. She promised he would be gone the next day. And the very next day, he flew out, and his daughter told him he was no longer welcome in her home. He now lives up north in Maryland with his other daughter, probably harassing other people. I honestly don't know what would have happened if I didn't follow my instincts that day. This happened 2 nights ago, so I'm still replaying it over and over in my head. I thought this would be a good place to share. I'm a pretty predictable person, with a predictable schedule, so I'm not sure if this was a random occurrence, or if someone knew my nightly routine. I'm a 35-year-old woman. My husband Rob gets up for work hours before me, so he goes to bed before I do. Usually I get to bed a few hours after he does, around the same time every night. I turn off the lights and the TV in the living room, and take my dog to the back door to let her out. She's tiny, old, and poses zero threat to anyone. The door leads to a large deck outside. Off to the right of the deck is a few steps down, and a small pathway to the gate, which we always keep chained and locked. Every single night before opening the door, I peek out the window right next to it without disturbing the blinds, and flip on the deck light. I never expect anyone to be out there, and we've never had a problem with anyone trespassing or trying to break in. It's just something I do every night. Kinda like peeking behind the shower curtain before I pee. I know no one is back there, but if I don't check, then that's gonna be the one time that there's actually someone hiding there. You know? I watch a ton of horror movies, and it's pitch black outside at night where I live, so cut me a break. A few nights ago, I got ready for bed. I went to the back door with my dog slowly following behind me, and peeked out the window. I flipped on the light. My heart jumped in my throat as I saw a skinny, dirty guy in his 30s or 40s standing off to the side of the door facing it. I saw him raise his arm up and hold a screwdriver above his head as soon as the light went on, preparing for someone to open the door. I screamed, "Rob, get up! Get the gun!" as loud as I could, which startled the man. He jumped over the rail of the deck, even though he was right next to the stairs, and ran away. My husband ran out of our bedroom with his gun. He called the police, and they showed up within 5 minutes. They drove all around trying to find the guy, but no luck. The guy broke the lock on our gate to get in. He also pried open the back screen door, which we always keep locked as well. If I would have opened the door without looking first, I might be dead. I don't know if I caught the guy trying to break in, or if he was waiting for me to open the door like I do every night. Either way, it was fucking terrifying. My parents are buying us outdoor security cameras this week as an early birthday present for Rob. I have an issue with writing novels, so bear with me a bit. I hadn't realized I buried this memory until a weird trigger made me remember it a few months ago. I can honestly say it was the scariest thing of my life, and I think it shaped how I see the world a lot more than I realized. I'll start with what triggered the memory. I was watching the first season of The Sinner a few months ago, and this happens in like the first 2 minutes, and is literally the promo photo, so it's not really a spoiler or anything. When the main character starts psychotically stabbing a guy, I got a very perturbed pit in my stomach. The scene is extremely disturbing, and sometimes scenes just get to me, but I'm a rabid horror fan, and I'm typically unfazed by these kinds of things. I've never experienced such a visceral, lasting reaction to a television scene, and it kind of freaked me out. I watched a few episodes at my friend's, and felt panicky and trapped. I eventually went home because I couldn't bear the feeling I had watching it. Then, as my obsessive only child Enneagram Type 5 self always does, I began obsessing over finding the root cause of the skin-crawling feeling I couldn't shake. Finally, I remembered it. I don't remember the exact moment later on in the show, but something triggered the memory of what happened to my mom and I when I was just a kid. This all happened in 2004, when I was only 11. My mom is a paralegal, and at the time worked at a family law firm. Something urgent had come up, as is life in the legal world, and she had to go get case materials from her job that night. She took me with her to go grab them. It was around 7 p.m. I should mention, I guess, that I lived in a fairly affluent and nice neighborhood, where it was safe and nothing bad ever really happened. My mom and I watch horror movies, so this isn't one of those forgot to lock the front door stories. I say this to give credit to my mom's insane sense of intuition that likely saved both our lives that night. We pulled into the parking lot, and my mom didn't get out of the car. I'm an only child, so I was reading in the back seat, and honestly I didn't notice or care. But eventually I asked her why we weren't getting out of the car yet. She replied that she was waiting because, as we pulled in, someone walked through the parking lot and got into their car right behind us, then proceeded to wait in his car while it was on with the lights pointed at ours. It wasn't overtly sketchy or creepy, as there were several non-ominous explanations, but my mom had a gut feeling. After 5 or 10 minutes of waiting, she eventually turned to me and said, "Okay, I have no idea what this guy is doing, so let's just go grab the stuff and leave." I didn't know this at the time because I was mildly oblivious, but he got out of his car and followed us. My mom told me to hurry up because it was freezing, and we jogged over to the door. Her building required a card to buzz you inside, so once we got in, we figured we'd be fine. The parking lot we were in is giant, and random people hang out there all the time, including myself frequently as a teenager. He came from seemingly nowhere, so the chances of him having a card to buzz in were not very high. This was also something I wasn't really aware of or paying attention to at the time, but a few moments after we buzzed in, thinking we were in the clear, he slid in right behind us. I asked my mom about this. I didn't learn what happened until years later, and I can understand why she didn't tell me. She said a few things ran through her mind. He could have been a total psycho who stole someone's card, which was the least likely as it was too random. So either he was an employee or a client. They held late-night mediation sessions inside the building, so it was typical to give clients a temporary pass for convenience. I'm going to assume this practice changed after this event. My mom, knowing the ID card system, actually wondered if she was overthinking it at this point, but she just had that gut feeling and stuck to it. Truly taught me from the get-go to fuck politeness. I hadn't seen him follow us in, and my mom honestly played it so cool that I didn't even put two and two together. I just thought it was another random employee. But I remembered having a weird gut feeling that I just couldn't put my finger on. Mercifully, I decided to shut up and follow my mom's lead. Before he came in, my mom was frantically pressing the elevator button, just in case he somehow got in, but it hadn't come yet. He came in and waited for the elevator for us. My mom was fake polite and said hello. Then when it came, he got in and held the door open for us, waiting. My mom really fucking killed it, thinking on her feet and pretended to get a call. She kind of shooed me to the side and told him, "Oh, I have to take this, so we'll just wait for the next one. Thank you," and ushered us both away. I followed without protest, even though I knew I saw that no one had actually called her. After the weird feeling I got and seeing her fake a call, I knew something was up. That and the man was extremely creepy, standing there holding open the elevator. The second it took off, she immediately pressed the button so the next one would come down, and grabbed me and told me quietly. That was the man who was waiting behind us in the car in the parking lot. He got out of his car and followed us inside. I was not letting us get in an elevator with him. When the elevator comes, we're going to run to my office and wait a few minutes before we take the stairwell out. At this point, I was freaking out, but stayed calm and quiet and followed her lead. She saw that his elevator went to the 3rd floor. She was on the 2nd, so we wouldn't run into him. Even if he somehow discovered we went to the 2nd floor on a different elevator, her office was right next to it, so he wouldn't have ever caught up to us. We ran into her office and locked the door, and waited for about 5 to 10 minutes, while she held her ear against it to make sure she didn't hear anything. As I'm writing this, it almost makes me laugh, thinking that we sound like lunatics, because at this point, we sound like paranoid freaks. Nothing had happened, but I'm so glad we watch way too many horror movies. We then unlocked the door and quickly looked out. We ran to the stairwell and ran the fuck out of her office, got in the car and drove home. That was the end of the story for me, at least at the time. I asked my mom when I was a teenager if she remembered that weird time at her office when we hid inside and ran away from a man in the elevator. Her face turned white, and she told me what had transpired while we were both waiting in her office and ran out of the soundproof stairwell. You see, the man in the elevator was there for a custody mediation session with his estranged ex-wife. He was against the divorce and was desperately trying to stop his wife from divorcing him. The custody session took place before my mom and I got there. He had refused to sign papers that would have awarded him less than 50% of their children living with him. He apparently got so angry that he got up and walked out halfway through the session. His wife decided to remain in the office for about 25 minutes after he left, because she was freaked out. During this time, he went back to his car and just sat inside it and sobbed. This was the moment when my mom and I had pulled into the office building. He eventually grabbed a pair of kitchen scissors he had in the glove box and got out and went back to the building. which is when he followed my mom and I inside. I'm not sure if us getting out of the car kind of snapped him out of it and gave him the push, if you will, to go back inside. He came back inside at the same time as us and got in the elevator, which he invited us inside with him. Based on the evidence from the trial involving a gray sweatshirt, prosecutors put together that he went to the 3rd floor and lurked around waiting for his wife. He got back in the elevator and waited until his wife went to leave and got inside. He proceeded to ambush her and stabbed her 106 times with a pair of scissors in his pocket. He murdered his wife in the most gruesome fashion. The details of the case are horrifying. The links are below, but fair warning on some graphic details. What chills me to my core is wondering what would have happened if we got into the elevator. It was clear he had an agenda and a direct target. It's highly possible he would have just left us alone and went along with his plan. But the last detail is that while he was waiting in his car, he was snorting methamphetamines and was high as a kite. The mediator was the key witness in trial, and her testimony is horrifying. Her husband also worked in the building, and she was walking to his office when she suddenly heard screaming. When she got closer to the elevator, she heard the wife yelling out her name. She yelled out, "It's him!" She found the husband dragging his wife inside the elevator with blood splattered everywhere, all over the walls. Then, right in front of her, he continued to plunge the scissors into his wife. When the police got there, they found him holding her, who was dead, choking her with his arm around her neck. This all took place while we were still in the building. We didn't hear it because we were in the cement stairwell and ran directly outside. All of the above is to say that he clearly went absolutely psychotic and lost his mind. Somebody who stabs their wife over 100 times with a pair of poultry scissors is clearly insane. But him rabidly continuing to murder her in front of the mediator and choking a dead body when the police arrived is just horrifying levels of awfulness. There's nothing to say that we wouldn't have set him off in the most random way, or that he hadn't already entered his psychotic break. My mom's actions likely saved our lives that night. She had a gut feeling and trusted her intuition. I read stories on here every day and sympathize heavily with them, of the people, particularly women, who are conditioned to be polite and end up in danger as a result. My mom knew the fake call might have seemed like bullshit, but she did not give a fuck, and was absolutely not getting in the elevator with him. She's not only my hero, but my best teacher. I learned that night to be hyper-vigilant, pay attention to every detail, and to fuck politeness. I'll never forget the slightly too wide, toothy smile that didn't seem to reach his eyes, while he stood 5 feet away from my mom and I holding open the elevator. Now that I've had this memory resurface, I think about it all the time. What would have happened if we got on with him?
What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the content of this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do decide you like my content enough to subscribe, please be sure to hit the bell button right next to the subscribe button and turn notifications to all so you can be notified of every video I post in the future. If you don't feel like doing that though, I post a video nearly every day, so you can just come back every now and then and check up on what you missed. If you guys have any criticisms on what I can do better or any feedback on the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as I always enjoy reading all the comments and I try to give them hearts and respond when I can. If you guys would like to reach me for any reason, or you would like to send in a story to be read, you can go ahead and take a look in the description below the video. You'll find a link to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has a theme, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Last but not least, I also run 2 other channels, Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour, where I do true crime videos and dark documentaries respectively. If that kind of content sounds interesting to you, why not go ahead and check it out and see if it is for you. Aside from that though guys, I think that's pretty much it for now, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.